is going to try to use Alaska to propose something that would be acceptable to Donald Trump, but not acceptable to Ukraine, thereby flipping the script and making the invaded look like the problem, like the obstacle to peace. I fear that's exactly the track we're on right now. And so we're a unified front. I mean, if you look at the diplomatic, economic, and military power represented with the British and the Germans and the French and the United States and Ukraine, the most to demonstrate with our allies and partners unity and power. But I think Vladimir Putin is hoping that he'll be able to sow division to weaken the alliance for purposes of isolating his prey in Ukraine so that he can continue to prey upon it.
What do you make of the optics here? A, do they matter compared to what we saw on Friday in Alaska? And if they do, what do you make of them with the EU leaders arriving here at the White House any moment, standing side by side with President Zelensky?
You know, I think in international politics and diplomacy, optics matter. I think at times we can overplay them. In the end, as we're seeing on the battlefield in Ukraine, it often comes down to hard power. But that's not to say that things like this don't matter. They do. And undoubtedly, our European allies, who are a great grand strategic asset for the United States and not a liability, they don't want to see a replay of what happened in the Oval Office with Zelensky last time. And so I think they're here to show support for Zelensky with their words and their presence. And I respect them for that. And rather than seeing that as a challenge or a threat, I hope President Trump sees it as an opportunity for us to demonstrate power. I mean, let's remember, Russia has continued to attack Ukraine. As last night, we have new people dead in Ukraine as recently as the last 24 hours. And so Russia, as I said, is casting power over the negotiating table, the shadow of power over the negotiating table. What are we doing to cast shadow over the power? Here's an opportunity to demonstrate some of the largest economies in the world with significant militaries to say we are unified here, and that will result in a better deal. And as we said, not all deals are the same. Some deals are bad. We all want peace. We all want the suffering to stop. I admire President Trump for wanting to end the casualties. But if we get a bad peace here, then we're simply going to see more war in the future, which means more suffering. So it's smart to demand more now so we have less suffering later.
We heard from the president's cabinet yesterday on Sunday shows and reports that there are talks of NATO-like security agreements for Ukraine. What did you make of that, and what could that look like if it's not actually NATO membership?
It's such an important question because there's been some reporting lately, including maybe some comments from Steve Witkoff, President Trump's negotiator here, that says that Russia was willing to accept security assistance. I mean, that wording I find very troubling, right? I mean, that's really not Vladimir Putin's choice, right? The United States can extend security assurances to anyone we please. And the people of Ukraine should be able to choose what their foreign policy is, right? And this goes back to, who should making these decisions? Is it the Ukrainian people or Vladimir Putin? And, some of the listeners might say, but NATO, NATO enlargement is the problem here. Well, that's just not my read, respectfully. NATO enlargement is not a threat to Vladimir Putin. NATO itself is a defensive alliance, and Vladimir Putin knows it. What's my evidence for that? If you look for years and years and years, you had the Baltic countries, members of NATO, that bordered Russia. And when you looked on the Russian side of the border, there was very little militarization. There was very few Russian forces there. So if NATO is such a threat to Russia, then why was Russia so unconcerned for so long about having NATO members right on the border? The truth is they're not. The reason Vladimir Putin doesn't want Ukraine to be a member of NATO is because once Ukraine, if they became a member of NATO, it becomes more difficult for Vladimir Putin to bully, coerce, control, and invade Ukraine. So the fact that he's resisted for so long NATO membership for Ukraine and other security assurances tells you something about his future plans. And if we just listen to that soldier that was interviewed on NBC News on Friday, who just lost his younger brother in fighting to defend their homes, he said, don't trust the Russians, they don't honor their agreements, and they'll be back for more. And so that's why I think Zelensky is so wise to be pushing for security assurances so that we don't see more war again in the future.
Now, while you're talking, Brad Bowman, of course, we're showing our viewers the White House. You can see the White House military lined up there in the driveway waiting for these EU leaders to arrive. Brad Bowman, as we continue to get this live shot from the White House, and we're just minutes away from their arrival, when it comes to Crimea specifically, what do you think happens here?
You know, Crimea is among the crown jewels of what Vladimir Putin has always wanted, right? Because of its location there in the Black Sea and the naval port there, and all the abilities that it provides the Kremlin, and they are very eager to keep that which they have stolen from Ukraine, and that is also why they have valued Kherson and Zaporizhia Oblast, because it provides a land bridge to Crimea. And, you know, this is just a horrible precedent, right? If you have a authoritarian, autocratic ruler who's seizing territory with force, it's a horrible principle and precedent. The problem is that there is no plan, as I said a moment ago, in the short or medium term, or ability that I see for Ukraine to get that back. So, you know, sometimes there's principle in what you want, and there's also what you can do. And so politics is the art of the possible. And we're trying to figure out what is possible here. But I do worry about the precedent that is established if we have some sort of agreement where Vladimir Putin in some form was successful in seizing territory with military force. I worry about the lessons that China, Iran, and North Korea will draw from that, and whether that might motivate them to try to accomplish the same thing in their respective regions. And real quickly, if helpful or interesting to you and your and your viewers, you know, a good deal and a bad deal. Well, you know, we have a bad deal we can look at, and that bad deal was the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. You know, I won't go into too much detail. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, you had Russian nuclear weapons on Ukrainian territory, and the Ukrainians agreed to give up those nuclear weapons in response, in return for assurances from the United States, Britain, and Russia. You know what Russia committed to explicitly? You can Google it online in the Budapest Memorandum. Here it is: to respect the independence and sovereignty and existing borders of Ukraine. The Kremlin committed to do that. They didn't do that in 2014. They didn't do that in the Donbass between 2014 and 2022. They didn't do that with their massive reinvasion in 2022, and they're not doing it now. You know what else they committed to? Refraining from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of Ukraine. They committed to that. The Kremlin did. And so one of the callers on Friday said, oh, you know, Ukraine's just part of Russia. Well, in the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, the Kremlin recognized Ukraine as a separate, independent, sovereign political entity with borders, and agreed to all those and made all those commitments. Here's a key point. If those were violated, according to the Budapest Memorandum, which Moscow signed, you know what the recourse was? They're going to take it to the UN Security Council, the United Nations Security Council. Many of your viewers will know who holds a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. Russia, right? And so that's a big, fat nothing burger to say that if we completely blow off our commitments here and invade you and threaten, you know, and violate your territorial integrity, your borders, your sovereignty, you can take it to the UN. That is the essence of a bad agreement, not well formulated, that was totally to the liking of Moscow. That's why they signed it, and the very thing we need to avoid now.
Brad Bowman, the European leaders who are arriving here at the White House any minute include the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. You have the French President, Mr. Macron, the Italian Prime Minister, the German Chancellor will all be involved in these meetings at the White House, along with the Finnish President. And then, of course, you also have Ursula von der Leyen, who is the European Commission President, along with the NATO Secretary General as well. What do you make of this group?
It's an incredibly impressive group, and the willingness of these individuals, all of them, to get on planes, and you know that you can imagine they have pretty busy inboxes and to-do lists, to get on a plane and come here. It tells you how important they think this is. So, you know, anyone who's looking at the news and saying, the Europeans are a bunch of free riders, you know, they're taking advantage of our largesse. Well, you know, we talked on Friday about how our European allies on the aggregate are now contributing more to Ukraine than we are. Yes, that's a group of them compared to just us, but on the aggregate they are, both in total assistance and security assistance now, just barely on security assistance, but very good. They're increasing their defense spending, which is going to improve improve their industrial base capacity, their arsenals, and their ability to help Ukraine. But we do have a window of opportunity here where U.S. Security assistance to Ukraine, our weapons, our munitions, are particularly important as our Europeans and allies continue to step up to the plate. But I think it's incredibly positive that all these leaders are coming. They're making the time to show a unified front to Vladimir Putin alongside the United States. And just a few more details. You have the leader of Finland coming. Let's remember, Finland was not a member of NATO. And, Finland and Sweden had decades, or in the case of Sweden, centuries of policies of essential neutrality in name, and even though they worked with NATO. But it was Vladimir Putin's unprovoked 2022 invasion that drove both those countries with decades or centuries of policies of neutrality to want to join the alliance. So, so who's to blame for NATO enlargement? Vladimir Putin. Note to self, Vladimir Putin, if you don't like NATO enlargement and you don't like European power in Eastern Europe, maybe you should stop invading your neighbors. And so Finland is a member of NATO now because of Vladimir Putin's invasion. And who can blame them, right? They're saying, maybe we're next. Oh, shoot, maybe we should join NATO too. So very interesting and important that the leader of Finland is there. And as I said earlier, really positive that you have the United Kingdom represented. You have Germany and France. These are some of the largest economies in the world. They have significant militaries. And those three nations in particular, along with Poland, hopefully, would be part of the security assurances to Ukraine. And I would hope and expect would take the lead in terms of any military forces in Ukraine, making sure that Vladimir Putin, that the Russian bear doesn't come back for more later. So I think it's very positive that they are here. And I really hope that everyone comes with the goal of trying to present a unified front and talking about what is necessary to protect our transatlantic interest and not allowing Vladimir Putin to create a false moral equivalence, to flip the script. And the pressure should be on Putin, the invader, not Ukraine, the invaded.
All right. Well, let's talk about security assurances and what that means for Europe. First, though, I want to show our viewers what's News Sunday.
Talk about the security guarantees, because you mentioned those. What does that mean in practicality? What is the U.S. willing to commit to that effort to give Ukraine the assurance?
Prepared to be able to give Article 5 security guarantees, but not from NATO, directly from the United States and other European countries. That is big. I mean, really big.
Does it mean boots on the ground? What does it mean, but logistically?
I think part of the discussion that we're going to have on Monday throughout the day, because there's going to be breakout sessions there, is exactly the specifics of what the Ukrainians feel that they need. Because remember, as mediators, we were at this summit to advance the Ukrainian position, and we did that. And we did it successfully. Now it's for us to drill down on the granular details of exactly what the Ukrainians need to give them a sense of security in the future, and, by the way, what the Europeans need as well. And we were fully committed to be there for that purpose.
All right, Brad Bowman, you heard it there. I mean, drill down on the details. What does Europe need? What does Ukraine need here? What do you expect?
No, thanks for playing that interview. I think that's important. Let's just make sure we all have some basic common vocabulary here. So what are we talking about with NATO and Article 5? So the North Atlantic Treaty was codified in 1949. It was signed there on Constitution Avenue in 1949. Is by many accounts viewed as one of the most successful alliances in history. Russia has never invaded a member of NATO because Russia knew that if you pick a fight with a member of NATO, you've picked a fight with the United States. So at its most basic level, American political commitment and military power has prevented members of the North Atlantic Treaty from suffering from a conventional military attack from Russia, making it hugely successful. At the heart of that success that I'm describing, that has helped secure peace for decades and is a major asset for the United States that we shouldn't take for granted, is Article 5. And Article 5 says that the parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all. And then there's more language there, and then each country will decide how to respond to that, and that's where some of the discretion comes in. But if the United States is saying that we will extend an Article 5-like commitment to Ukraine, then I agree with Steve Witkoff. That is very, very significant. That is very significant, and would be viewed, I think, by Ukraine if it's something that is solid and explicit and trustworthy, as a major win for European security and for Ukraine, and if it succeeds in preventing additional Russian aggression in the future, would be very, very positive. But I also look at the fact future would be very, very positive. But I also look at the fact that, the number one threat we confront as Americans, I would say, is China. And we need to devote more resources in the Pacific. So I would recommend that if we were to extend a commitment like that, that we should have the same or stronger commitments from the United Kingdom, from France and Germany in particular, and as many other NATO member countries, commitment and combat power, but we should see it primarily being a European effort, because this is Europe after all. But this gets to one of the heart of the matters, is that when something needs to be done for your own national security interests, you make sure it's done. And if your partners aren't doing what you want them to do, you don't just walk, well, they're not doing enough, I'm going to walk away. No, if it's important to your interest, you do it. And if your partners want to do more, but they need some time, then you help them build that capability. You're patient, you work with them, but over time, absolutely, this should be led by Europeans for obvious reasons.
We're learning from White House reporters that the French President Emmanuel Macron arrived at Dulles International Airport here in just outside of Washington, D.C. around 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, and his motorcade is making its way to the White House, and we're expecting him along with 6 other European leaders ahead of a meeting with President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky. Live coverage here on C-SPAN throughout the afternoon of this meeting at the White House, following the meetings that the president had with the Russian President Vladimir Putin on Friday in Alaska. We're going to get your thoughts on this as well. But before we do that, Brad Bowman, what is President Putin up to after Friday's meeting?
I think that President Putin probably is very pleased with what he's seen thus far. And why do I say that? Well, if you look at Russian state media, they're in various degrees of celebratory fervor. They view Alaska as incredibly positive from a Kremlin perspective.
Okay, Brad, I'm going to jump in here because the door is opening here to the first European leader. Let's just see who it is here. It's the NATO Secretary General. He's arriving first at the White House. All right. Brad Bowman, is it important that the NATO Secretary General arrive first? What is his role here?
I think it's incredibly positive that he's the first to arrive for multiple reasons. One, because of the importance of NATO, as we were just discussing, and because of the Secretary General personally. He has developed an ability to work with Trump, to interact with Trump in a way that has been successful. Some have referenced him as like a Trump whisperer. He's learned how to work with President Trump. And so if he's the one that walks in first and kind of sets the tone, I think that's incredibly positive and probably deliberate and a smart move.
Let's go back to what you were saying on Putin, Brad Bowman, while we wait for this next European leader to arrive.
Yeah, so no, I think that if you look at Russian state media, which obviously is not known as independent actors, and so they're going to be saying things that they either are cleared with the Kremlin or they believe would be fine with the Kremlin, and they have been celebrating that they've accomplished the things I warned about, frankly, on Friday. They being the Russians, that they have delayed consequences for Russia, that consequences that President Trump threatened, but most of which have not been implemented. That they're on the verge of maybe getting acceptance for territory that they've stolen from Ukraine, and maybe getting more than they've been able to get on the battlefield via diplomacy, particularly in Donetsk, which would be very significant because the Ukrainians have built up very significant defenses in the parts of Donetsk, the oblast, that the Russian forces have not been able to take. They haven't been able to take those and hold that. And so if they were able to get at the diplomatic table, that would be perceived, I think, correctly by the Kremlin as a major win.
All right, the second door is opening here. And we have the arrival of the European Commission President here, Ursula von der Leyen. And Brad Bowman, tell us about her role this morning and what has she been saying about the U.S. responsibility here and how far the U.S. should go or be concerned about going with when it comes to Russia.
I think her presence is important because, you don't have every European country represented here. Of course not. You just have some of the leading countries. But, this is a problem for all of Europe. So as she comes with her title and her role, then to some degree or another, she can speak for all of Europe and of her member states in some capacity. Now, every nation state has different interests and different priorities here. You have countries like Hungary, for example, that have taken a very, very different approach than other countries. But I think her presence is really important. For example, that have taken a very, very different approach than other countries. But I think her presence is really important. It provides additional diplomatic clout. So you can really think of the NATO Secretary General as representing the military power, and you can see her representing really the political diplomatic power. And I think it's very positive that those two are there, and I think they arrived in exactly the right order.
And they're being greeted, by the way, by Monica Crowley, who's the chief of protocol for the White House, not being greeted by President Trump. Brad Bowman, is this sort of the normal or the traditional way for any White House, that you have the chief of protocol out there on the carpet to greet these leaders?
Normally I would want to see the president greeting both of these individuals, given their position and their stature. But this is not a normal day at the White House, right? When you look at what's at stake here, and you look at the quantity of dignitaries, this is not a normal day. So, if we deviate from the norms here, I'm not going to get particularly upset or excited about that. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of moving parts. The best laid plans often collide with reality, and you just do the best you can. But, I think the public meetings, the public statements are going to be really, really important. And what's happening behind closed door in terms of who's greeting who's handshaking, I think that's less important.
All right, I'm going to weave in Peter here, who's been waiting. He's in North Conway, New Hampshire, an independent caller. Peter, we're keeping our eyes here on this live shot right outside the White House for more European leaders to arrive. But go ahead and give us your thoughts here real quickly, because I see another car pulling up. Peter?
Hi, Greta. I hope I can do this quickly. I think what's missing in this conversation is the historical content, and that is that the Swedish territory to acquire in the next what happened in Israel over 270 years ago.
Peter, I apologize. I know you hung on the line there for a while, but we cannot hear you. It's too difficult. This is Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, arriving next. Again, being greeted by the Chief of Protocol for the White House, Monica Crowley. He will then make his way into the White House, where all the European leaders are expected then to gather behind closed doors and wait for the Ukrainian president, Mr. Zelensky, to arrive, which should be around 1 p.m. Eastern time. I'm going to go to James next, who's in Coopersburg, Pennsylvania, Republican. James, your turn.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call, Greta. My question is for Mr. Bowman. If he could speak a little bit concisely about the Budapest Memorandum of '94, what it meant then and how it applies to certain situations today, such as what's going on with the Ukraine and Russia.
All right, James. Thank you for that.
Hey, James, thanks for the question. I agree with you that the 1994 Budapest Memorandum is very important here. I actually mentioned that a moment ago, perhaps before you were listening, but at risk of repeating too much, a quick summary is that this was an agreement between Ukraine and Russia, and the United States and the United Kingdom also signed it because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, you had Russian nuclear weapons on Ukrainian territory. And there was a desire on the part of Moscow to get those nuclear weapons back. And Ukraine was willing to give up those nuclear weapons. One wonders whether they regret that decision in return for commitments. Is this all starting to sound familiar? And those commitments were, I read them earlier, respect, this is directly from the agreement, quote, respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine, end quote. Quote, refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of Ukraine, end quote. Russia has violated those. And in that agreement, what were the consequences for violating that? As I said earlier, the parties will take it to the United Nations Security Council, where, of course, Russia, as a permanent member, one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, has a veto. So I would cite that as an example of 2 or 3 things. One, It's an agreement. It's demonstration that agreements are not worth the paper they're written on when you're dealing with the Russians. You can expect them to what they say, and that we need to make sure that whatever agreement we have here is actually one that can be enforced. Otherwise, it's not going to be worth the paper it's written on. Enforced, I mean in terms of real consequences and standing by Ukraine to help defend it if Russia tries to come back for more later.
All right, we are live at the White House here this afternoon. The camera shot is up outside the White House, and we have 3 of the 7 European leaders who have arrived. We are waiting on the leaders of France, Germany, Italy, and Finland, all for their cars to pull up here outside of the White House and make their way into this afternoon's historic meetings between Ukrainian President Zelensky, these EU leaders, and President Trump. LV in Mount Morris, Michigan, Democratic caller. LV, question or comment here?
Well, I got a question and then a comment about 2 different things. I'm 74 years old, Vietnam era vet, and I'm trying to figure out why you guys, the news media, know that President Donald Trump is lying about who started the war, and nobody's really saying anything about it. They act like he's telling the truth. I remember when you couldn't lie on TV, but now anything can be said on television.
Okay, LV, and LV, your question. Let's go to your question.
Okay. That is my question. I'm asking, why do you guys continue to let him lie about Ukraine starting the war?
I see. All right. LV there in Mount Morris, Michigan, Democratic caller. Brad Bowman?
Thanks, LV, for the call. I'm happy to report that I have been saying since February 24th, 2022, that this is an unprovoked naked aggression by Vladimir Putin. Russia is the invader. Ukraine is the invaded. And I've been saying that so much that some of my colleagues get annoyed with my repetition. It is a fact, and good policy starts with an accurate assessment of the truth. And here's the truth. This is the worst invasion in Europe since World War II. Vladimir Putin started it, and he can end it right now.
We'll go to Mike next, Columbia, Maryland, Independent. Hi, Mike.
Hi. My comment is, what has protected the United States all these years since the Cold War? The fact that we have nuclear weapons. I think it's a great deterrent, and I would like to see maybe President Macron or the British Prime Minister give Ukraine back tactical nuclear weapons. Maybe that would stop the war, because Putin would be, afraid that it could start something right on his border. I don't think they ever should have given it up, and I think that's what's kind of deterred, us from being not speaking Russian right now.
All right, Mike. Brad Bowman.
It's a great comment. Thanks for the call. I think when you look at the fact that we had 2 world wars within a 30-year period in the first half of the 20th century, and while we've had some horrible wars since 1945 as Americans, I'm thinking of the Korean War and the Vietnam War and many others, but we haven't had a world war like we saw in the first half of the 20th century. And one reason for that, many scholars believe, is the presence of nuclear weapons. So nuclear weapons can play that role, but we also want to avoid nuclear proliferation, because the more nuclear weapons you have, the more chance, at least theoretically, there is of their use, and that would be bad.
All right, Brad Bowman, the Italian leader has just arrived. Can you talk about, she's new to this position, can you talk about having Italy here?
Italy is an important country in Europe, obviously, who has diplomatic power and has a relevant military capability. Seeing this kind of parade of European leaders come in, each of them from different political parties and different places on the political spectrum, really demonstrates the challenges for European leaders to try to corral the cats, if you will. I mean, this is like herding cats to some degree, because you have such different national interest. But at the same time, I think all of these leaders are unified by the fact, the ones that we're seeing here today, with clarity on what I said earlier, that Vladimir Putin started this war and that it should stop, that we should have an unconditional, immediate ceasefire. and that we should be very careful with concessions of Vladimir Putin. Because as Winston Churchill said, if you reward aggression, paraphrasing him, you're likely to get more of it. So these leaders and the leader of Italy that just walked in, coming from different places on the political spectrum, but and coming with some different priorities, no doubt, and different capabilities, both economic and military, to the table, but unified by the fact that Vladimir Putin is an invader, he's the problem, and that we should stand by Ukraine and help them as much as we can.
The European Commission president has arrived, the NATO Secretary General as well, along with Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, and then you just saw the Italian Prime Minister Meloni also arriving at the White House. We are waiting on the French president, the German chancellor, and the Finnish president as well, all expected here at the White House this afternoon for meetings with the Ukrainian president, Mr. Zelensky, and of course, President Trump. Gina, Huntsville, Alabama, Republican. Gina, good afternoon, I should say. And what do you make of these meetings following that summit in Alaska on Friday?
Good afternoon, Greta. One thing I can say about the red carpet was you catch more bees with honey than vinegar. Number two, as you know, I served in 2 different wars in the Middle East. And my son is currently on active duty. And as I look at it, Europe, they're talking about like a South Korea, North Korea, DMZ line or something like Japan. I Googled it. There are no Europeans in South Korea or Japan. And I just do not agree with American boots on the ground here. And I'll leave it at that, Greta, and you have a very blessed day, hon.
All right, Gina. Brad Bowman.
Ma'am, thanks for the call. Thank you for your service, and thank you for the continued military service of your son there on active duty. Great respect to you for that. And you're raising fundamentally important questions. Questions like, where should we actually have U.S. service members? After Putin's unprovoked massive reinvasion in 2022, some were calling for a no-fly zone, an American-enforced no-fly zone. I opposed that because anyone who understands no-fly zones understands that would entail targeting Russian radars and Russian missile launchers, surface-to-air missile launchers, and aircraft and other things. And that would be a direct military conflict between the United States and Russia, something that we were able to avoid for 4 decades during the Cold War. And so my approach from the beginning has been what is necessary to protect American interests and help Ukraine continue to exist while avoiding direct war between the United States and Russia. So those are my goals, and Gina, it sounds like we have the same goals. So we should be very careful about sending American military troops into conflict zones, for sure. I'm with you on that. But you mentioned South Korea. I would just highlight that we've had tens of thousands of Americans in South Korea for decades. And as a result of that, we have an incredibly economically prosperous and military capable ally in South Korea that helps defend American interests in that region, a major asset for us. So by maintaining troops there, we have prevented a North Korean invasion, because North Korea would like to conquer and exterminate South Korea and control the whole peninsula. And the reason that South Korea is a major, prosperous, democratic partner is because, in part, we've stood by them all these years and helped them achieve that. And that has been a wise investment, and they are one of our leading and most valuable allies in the world. So, yes. So, I edited a monograph in 2020 called Defending Forward. It was the forward on that monograph was written by Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, a Democrat. He wrote the forward for our monograph. H.R. McMaster wrote one of the chapters. He's the National Security Advisor to Trump. So bringing in officials from both parties here. And one of the arguments that we made there was that we should be very careful about sending troops into conflict zones because that's one of the most serious decisions a president can make. And we should also scrutinize withdrawals, because some withdrawals are dumb, and some and we have to bring the same scrutiny to those. I would say that President Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan was a disaster. I called for him not to do that in the Washington Post, and H.R. McMaster made that argument with me in the Wall Street Journal. And he proceeded with the withdrawal, and that may have informed Vladimir Putin's thinking a few months later when he decided to launch this massive reinvasion. So we better be careful what we do in Kyiv, because it may not stay in Kyiv.
Brad Bowman, the Finland leader, is arriving right now. If you could just, while we watch him get out of the car and be greeted by the chief of protocol, remind our viewers, for those that may have just missed this earlier, how it's interesting that you have Finland here for this gathering.
It is very interesting, and for those who maybe missed our discussion earlier, Finland didn't used to be a member of NATO. For many, many years, Finland had kind of a policy of at least a name neutrality. They decided not to be a member of NATO, along with Sweden, that has centuries-long tradition of neutrality. But after Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, they said, "Holy cow!" Naked aggression is not a relic of the black and white newsreels of the first half of the 20th century. This could happen to us. We better get in NATO. So they tried to get into, they filed the paperwork to get into NATO. There was a huge delay because Ankara, Turkey, delayed it. We could talk about that. But now they're a member of NATO. So here you have the leader of Finland, the duly elected democratic leader of Finland, showing up at the White House with a long, hundreds of kilometer shared border with Russia. In Finland, if you look at the 1940 Winter War, for example, there's some relevant history here that we can learn lessons from, but very, very significant that the leader of Finland is here. They are a member of NATO now because Vladimir Putin pushed them into NATO. And as I said earlier, Vladimir Putin says, oh, NATO enlargement is horrible. Well, he's the reason countries want to be in NATO, because he keeps invading, conquering, and threatening his neighbors. And we talked about nuclear weapons earlier. The Kremlin has threatened to use nuclear weapons against Ukraine. So consider that, right? You had Russian nuclear weapons in Ukraine after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Ukraine gave up those nuclear weapons, is not a nuclear armed power. And then Russia, a nuclear armed power, is threatening to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, right? If that's not going to promote nuclear proliferation, I don't know. So I'll end with this. When we're deciding what is going on in a region, it's good to listen to the people who are closest to the threat. And Finland shares a long border with Russia, just joined NATO because of what Vladimir Putin did. And they thought what is happening there in Ukraine is so important, so significant, that here we have the leader of Finland walking into the White House to make his voice heard.
Finnish President Alexander Stubb just arriving at the White House. The White House reports are that the French President Emmanuel Macron has already arrived at the White House, so that would leave just the German Chancellor, the seventh European leader who will be joining the president for his meetings with Mr. Zelensky today. The president on Truth Social yesterday called it a big day at the White House. Never had so many European leaders at one time. He said it was his great honor to be hosting them. We're including all of you in this conversation today, this afternoon as well, with C-SPAN's live coverage here of these White House meetings. If you're a Republican, dial in at 202-748-8920. Democrat, 202-748-8921. Independent, your line today is 202-748-8922. And you can also text, include your first name, city, and state at 202-748-8903. Melissa in Midland, Michigan, Independent. Let's hear from you. Melissa,
hi.
Good. Hi, Melissa. Go ahead.
How you doing? Well, I just want to know. I'm glad Donald Trump is as my president. I'm a Republican. Served 9 years in the service. And the Mickey Mouse Club. You might as well say as a guard. Why didn't Biden do anything about this that's going on right now?
Okay, we'll take that. Brad Bowman.
Yeah, thank you. I mentioned earlier that I served in the U.S. Senate for almost 9 years total, advising three different Republican senators who were serving on the Armed Services or Foreign Relations Committee. So I was there advising a Republican senator during the Obama administration. And one of our great frustrations at the time, I'm just, as someone who was staffing a member of those committees, was that the Obama administration was willing to provide some assistance to Ukraine after the 2014 Crimea invasion by Russia, but would not provide Ukraine lethal assistance. And the concern of the Obama administration was that we might provoke Putin. Okay, that was the primary reason why the United States under President Obama did not want to give weapons to Ukraine, because there was a fear that that would provoke the Kremlin, which had already invaded Crimea. And then flash forward, I saw a similar dynamic. I have seen a similar dynamic with during the Biden administration, where after the invasion, let's give credit where it's due, the Biden administration implemented the most significant security assistance campaign I've seen in many years, and ultimately sent a large quantity and variety of weapons in a security assistance campaign that frankly is stronger than what we're doing now. But that's on the positive side. But on the negative side, at each point where there was a decision about a large weapon system like the HIMARS system, these ground launch systems that can launch missiles deep behind the front lines, or Patriot air missile defense systems, or F-16s, whenever there was a decision to provide a big weapon system or key munitions like the ATACMS, the Army Tactical Missile System, what you'd get from the Biden administration was this no, then maybe, then yes dynamic. I call it the no, maybe, yes dynamic. And again, the fear was provoking Putin. And so what happened was you had weeks or months of delay. Ukrainians are dying defending their homes. The Russians are making gains, and you have this no, maybe, yes dynamic playing out. So do you hear the nuance of what I'm saying? Great credit to the Biden administration for standing with Ukraine rhetorically and in action, in word and deed, and sending so many weapons. But you also had delay along the way, and that delay, frankly, was helpful to Vladimir Putin. And no matter, I don't care what your party is, the fact is that the invasion, the 2022 invasion, happened on President Biden's watch, and so deterrence failed. So that's just a fact. You can't spin that. That's the fact. What's true now during the Trump administration is that they inherited a very tough situation from President Biden, for sure. But they, in some cases, have made it worse and have failed to implement as strong a security assistance campaign, and have repeatedly threatened consequences for Vladimir Putin, but have at times hesitated to implement those consequences. And so that's my best quick summary of kind of what we've seen across those three presidents.
Brad Bowman, we have a live shot here at the White House with the American flag in the forefront of the screen, and you can see the military folks lined up here on the White House grounds waiting for the next European leader. They just moments ago stood at attention, so perhaps we will see another vehicle with a European leader arriving here at the White House. Brad Bowman, while I see another vehicle pulling up here, so let's just wait and see who this is, and then we can continue to talk. Looks like it's the German Chancellor arriving here at the White House. Brad Bowman, go ahead and talk about the role of Germany.
Germany, because of its political power, the size of its economy, its geography, has an enormous role to play here. So that's all true. What's also been frustrating over time is that the Germans have not been spending what we need them to spend on their defense. We've seen positive progress lately. We've seen some positive commitments. They joined other NATO members to say that they're going to spend 3.5% of their gross domestic product on defense by 2035, and another 1.5% on defense-related investments. That's all positive. But given the size of the German economy, them failing to spend for so many years that minimum of 2% of GDP on defense really was costly, because 2% GDP of the German economy is a lot of money and a lot of resources. And so we find ourselves now in catch-up mode, if you will, trying to build, as I said earlier, European defense industrial production capacity, their arsenals, so they can help Ukraine more and carry more of the burden. And one of the reasons why we're playing catch-up is the unfortunate political resistance for so long in Germany to not spend more on defense. So I don't want to do historical sniping, but that's just the reality of where we are now as we make decisions. But any solution, any better path forward in Ukraine, we're going to have Berlin playing a leading role, and it's very positive that the leader of Germany is there today.
And that German leader is Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor. And just to revise what we said earlier, the French President Emmanuel Macron is still en route to the White House. So he will be the last European leader here to arrive this afternoon in Washington, D.C. for these meetings with the Ukrainian president and President Trump. Punchbowl News, Brad Bowman, reports this morning about what's next, that this is a three-phase approach. You had the meetings in Alaska with President Trump and President Putin on Friday. Today, you have the meetings between President Trump, Zelensky, and the European leaders. And if it goes well today, they're hoping for a trilateral meeting. They say that they will have a trilateral meeting for Trump, Putin, and Zelensky scheduled to take place within the week. What do you make of that?
You know, what we essentially have here, I mean, I'm being oversimplifying it maybe a little bit, is you have the President of the United States basically conducting shuttle diplomacy. I think it was a mistake, as I said on Friday, to not have Ukraine in Alaska. You know, as I said on Friday, American listeners should imagine two foreign states at a negotiating table negotiating about our borders, our security, without us at the table. I think you would be furious. I would have been furious. And I think not having Zelensky there kind of played into Putin's hands, unfortunately, as headlines since then have kind of demonstrated. But with all that said, I give President Trump credit for quickly contacting Zelensky after Alaska and doing this today. So I think, you know, it was a mistake not to have Ukraine there in Alaska, but, you know, they made that damage slightly less by reaching out, having President Trump reach out quickly to Zelensky and European leaders and hosting them here today. And so, you know, it's kind of a mix of, mistake, but, you know, nice job trying to clean up that mistake a little bit. And I give the president great credit for what he's doing here today. And if the next step is a trilateral meeting that includes the United States, Ukraine, and Russia, then I'd say that's exactly what we should have done from the beginning. And I'm glad that would be next, because in the end, if you had to put on a bumper sticker what all of these European leaders are going to say, it's going to be some version of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, right? And just in terms of good principles and fairness and protecting American national security interest and not acting like, you know, we're 19th century Sir Maps-a-Lot drawing borders for places we don't understand without the people even being in the room. Obviously, if you're talking about the future of Ukraine, you'd want the duly elected leader of Ukraine at the table. So if the next step is a trilateral meeting, I say bravo, that's good.
Well, what if should it include the European leaders as well, the next step?
You know, if I were advising the president on this, I would say whenever possible, bring in as many of if we can speak with one voice, bring as many of our European allies as possible. What a wonderful image would it be to have one side of the table where you have the leaders of the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, Poland, others, on one NATO Secretary General, European other leaders, and then on the other side you have Vladimir Putin. That would be a visual demonstration of what is happening here. You have the largest invasion in Europe since World War II, started by Vladimir Putin as a self-aggrandizing war of conquest, standing against the entire transatlantic community who believes that we should have a world made of citizens, as Kurt Volker said, not subjects.
We'll hear from Val next, who's in Woodside, New York, Republican. Val, welcome to the conversation.
Oh, yes, Bradley, I have two questions. The first question is, you did mention all the arsenal that Biden backtracked and didn't give to Ukraine. Do they have it all now? And if they do, why aren't they winning the war? And secondly, is Trump aware of the agreement that was made, like you were mentioning, I forget the word you used, in 1994, when Russia signed it, we signed it, Britain signed it, and then Russia broke it. So it just shows that this man cannot be trusted. And I feel very sorry for Ukraine and the situation that they're in. And those are my two questions mainly.
All right.
And what would you do?
Val, I'm going to jump in, Brad Bowman, before you answer, Val, because the flags have just gone up at the White House. And so I expect then we should see the French president here rolling up. Let's talk about France's role, and specifically Emmanuel Macron. What has he said? What has been his stance when it comes to Russia-Ukraine?
You know, France is obviously an important European power, one of our longest-standing allies. You know, students of history will know that we owe the French a great debt of gratitude for their help at Yorktown, that war during the Revolutionary War that helped us deliver that defeat to the British there. And so, and we know the role of French citizens in helping our country get started early. We also know that the United States came to help liberate France during World War II from Nazi occupation, with thousands of Americans paying the ultimate sacrifice on D-Day, and those Rangers who scaled Pointe du Hoc to begin to claw back the European continent from the Nazis. And so there's a deep relationship here with France. And in this world where we have an axis of aggressors emerging, consisting of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, who are working together more and more, making each of them more capable in their ongoing or prospective spheres of aggression, it's good to have friends. And France is a leading friend. Macron has wanted to assert France's role within Europe, and is happy to see France kind of stepping up more and more. And sometimes there's some conflict around that, but it's unambiguously good that he's here today, and that by and large he agrees with us on what needs to be done.
And what is his relationship with President Trump? There he is shaking hands.
They've had some interactions over time, and he's been able to navigate, not unlike the Secretary General in some ways, with a little bit different flavor, some of the challenges associated with President Trump's unique style. But he brings a kind of a savvy and a sophistication here, and significant economic power and military capabilities that will be relevant to any plan that involves security assurances and European troops in Ukraine. So it's very, very positive that he's here. There's a few things around the margins we can debate with France from an American perspective, but by and large, we agree on the things that matter most here in this context.
All right. All 7 European leaders have arrived at the White House, Brad Bowman. That includes British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. You have the Italian Prime Minister Meloni. And you also have the Finnish President Alexander Stubb, Ursula von der Leyen, who is the European Commission President, and of course the NATO Secretary General, all at the White House now. And those 7 leaders, along with President Trump, are now waiting for the Ukrainian President, Mr. Zelensky, to arrive at the White House. And we're expecting that around 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time. Before we start talking about Mr. Zelensky's arrival, Brad Bowman, let's take Val's question here. The arsenal she talked about in winning the war, do they have the arsenal that was denied to them by President Biden? Do they have it now, or are they winning the war?
Thanks to that caller for 2 great questions, really substantive, I think valuable questions. And the first question, if I heard it correctly, was I was making kind of a nuanced argument about what the the Biden administration did in helping Ukraine. And the summary again is that the Biden administration sent an enormous quantity and variety of weapons to Ukraine, and Ukraine continues to exist today, as we sit here today and watch these leaders arrive at the White House, for 2 primary reasons. First is the bravery and capability of the Ukrainian people to defend their homes. And second is the weapons they've received from others, especially the United States. And so so deterrence failed on President Biden's watch, no doubt about it. We can go back and say, if you'd been more proactive up front, maybe that wouldn't have happened, for sure. But then the Biden administration responded by sending a whole lot of weapons, establishing presidential drawdown authority use, where we transferred weapons from our own arsenal, and worked with Congress on the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, where money was used to buy new weapons and deliver them later once they were built. But what I was describing is part of that positive process, you saw this repeated instance time and time again where there was a hesitation and delay to send certain weapons and munitions for fear of provoking Putin. And that caused costly delay on the battlefield in Ukraine. So those weapons, to answer your question, ma'am, have continued to arrive, especially the newer ones that were contracted for, as they've been built. They've continued to be delivered. Ones that were committed during the Biden administration have continued to be delivered by the Trump administration, with 2 notable exceptions. And we talked about this on Friday on the Washington Journal, and that was early this year there was a suspension. And there's just no other way to view that other than that was the Trump administration trying to coerce Ukraine to agree to a deal. And I really feel that was a mistake. We were basically punishing the victim there by depriving them of the means to defend their homes, thereby empowering Putin and helping invading Russian forces. That was a mistake. Thankfully, it was short-lived, and then it was reversed. Excuse me. But then you saw a suspension of weapons again more recently that was led by the Pentagon that President Trump then reversed. So that's kind of an overview, excuse me, of what's happened on weapons. And then you asked about the Budapest Memorandum. The president's being advised by individuals who understand, I think, the Budapest Memorandum. But it might kind of seem like obscure knowledge, but I think it's incredibly relevant because, as I said earlier, it reminds us of 2 or 3 what I would call axioms, and that is the Russians don't honor their commitments, and they will be back for more if they think they can get away with it. And there are good agreements and bad agreements. There's good peace and bad peace. And the Budapest Memorandum was a badly formulated. If the consequences taking our concerns to the UN Security Council, where Russia is a permanent member and has a veto, which they're obviously going to kill after they've committed an invasion, that's probably not a brilliant plan. So we need to avoid mistakes like that.
Again, we are waiting for the Ukrainian president, Mr. Zelensky, to arrive here at the White House. He's expected around 1 p.m. Eastern time. Following that, around 1:15 is when the president will meet with Mr. Zelensky in the Oval Office. Brad Bowman, this will be the second time those two have been in the Oval Office in the president's first year of this second term. Let's talk about that first Oval Office meeting. Brad Bowman?
Yeah, it didn't go well at all for those who remember it and for those who didn't see it. And I think it's a small group of people that didn't see it because it was so noteworthy. You basically had a shouting match in the Oval Office. Rather unorthodox, shall we say. You had the vice president there. You had the Secretary of State. You see the picture there on your screen of the two leaders talking. And I think it was deeply unfortunate, honestly. I think that should not have been aired publicly. I think that hurt U.S. American interest, national security interest. And it was a gift of Vladimir Putin. Because as I said earlier, I think one of his big goals, one of his big goals is to sow division within the transatlantic alliance. Because the more divided we are from our European allies, the more he can pick them off one by one. And so if you look at the information warfare campaign that the Kremlin has conducted for years, they're trying to distract Americans. They're trying to divide us from our allies because that empowers them as Vladimir Putin tries to reconstitute as much of the Soviet Union as possible. And so I am hoping sincerely that the discussions this time go well, that any sort of disagreements or tension are resolved behind closed doors. That's what you do with your good friend. When your good friend is encountering the worst day of their life, you don't join the bullies and start kicking your friend when they're down. So resolve those differences behind closed doors, get those resolved, and then come out and present a unified front. That's my hope. I believe that what will best secure American interests and not deliver an unforced error and gift to Vladimir Putin.
Zelensky's attire was an issue at that Oval Office meeting in February. Axios reporting on that today says that it was an issue ahead of the Oval meeting that exploded when Trump and Zelensky met at the NATO summit in June. The Ukrainian president wore a black jacket rather than his customary military-style sweatshirt that you see him wearing there. Trump was happy about the change in attire, and according to Axios, Zelensky will show up at the White House today with the same jacket. Brad Bowman, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, all of us as individuals, and some more than others, we all like to feel respected, and it seemed clear that President Trump didn't appreciate what President Zelensky was wearing there. There's some precedent for this. I mentioned Winston Churchill earlier. During everything that the Great Britain was going through during World War II, he would often wear like a jumpsuit, so there is some precedent for here. But, if I had been asked, I would have advised the Ukrainian leader to put on a suit. I get it that his country is enduring a brutal war of conquest, trying to defend itself and its right to exist. We've seen crimes against humanity in Bucha. We've seen thousands of Ukrainian children abducted by Vladimir Putin. We've seen, roughly 500,000 or so Ukrainian casualties. So I get it. This is serious. This is serious for him. And he's trying to reflect the fact that his fellow citizens are fighting and dying as he's sitting there by what he's wearing. But at the same time, in international diplomacy, you want your interlocutor to feel respected. And so when you go to the Oval Office, put on some nice clothes to show respect. So I would have advised him to dress differently last time. It was obviously used by enemies of Ukraine and those who don't understand the American interest in Ukraine to win some cheap points. And of course, the Kremlin made the most of it. But these things, as I said earlier, this kind of symbolism and imagery matters, and I'm cautiously confident that President Zelensky will be wearing something different this time.
The military personnel with flags have lined up here outside of the White House. This is a different entrance, as you can see, for the Ukrainian president. He will arrive there, and we will see who greets the Ukrainian president in the driveway this afternoon. Ahead of that, which we will show you live, of course, let's listen to the Ukrainian president at a news conference alongside the European Commission president yesterday. Here's some of what he had to say about today's meeting.
First, we have to stop the killings. Putin has many demands, but we do not know all of them. And if there are really as many as we heard, then it will take time to go through them all. It's impossible to do this under the pressure of weapons. So it's necessary to cease fire and work quickly on a final deal. We'll talk about it in Washington. Putin does not want to stop the killing, but he must do it. Second, we need real negotiations, which means they can start where the front line is now. The contact line is the best line for talking, and Europeans support this. And we thank everyone. Russia is still unsuccessful in Donetsk region. Putin has been unable to take it for 12 years, and the constitution of Ukraine makes it impossible to give up territory or trade land. Since the territorial issue is so important, it should be discussed only by the leaders of Ukraine and Russia at the trilateral Ukraine, United States, Russia. So far, Russia gives no sign that trilateral will happen, and if Russia refuses, then new sanctions must follow. This third, it's important that America agrees to work with Europe to provide security guarantees for Ukraine, and we are very thankful to the United States and to the President for such signal.
Ukrainian President Zelensky yesterday holding a news conference with the European Commission President. Brad Bowman here is with us this afternoon to give us his insight and analysis ahead of Mr. Zelensky's arrival at the White House. We are just a minute away here, Brad Bowman. What do you make of his statement there yesterday at that news conference?
A lot of important content there. So what did he say very quickly? He said, we got to stop the killing. That's what President Trump has said. He wants to stop the killing. So that first thing he said there was directly aligned with what has been the top priority for President Trump. He noted that Putin has many demands. That is accurate. Putin has many demands. Putin is trying, as I keep saying, trying to lock in what he's stolen from Ukraine and see if he can get more at the diplomatic table than he's been able to accomplish on the battlefield. And Zelensky highlighted that the Russians, he said for 12 years, now he's going back, obviously, to Crimea and what happened and what started in the Donbass after that, has been unable to take all of the Donetsk Oblast. And so Putin is trying to get that at the diplomatic table, that which they've been unable to achieve on the battlefield, and Zelensky highlighted that. He also called for essentially a full unconditional ceasefire. That, I believe, is consistent with American national security interests and what I said it should have been the goal in Alaska. And, and President Trump himself said going there that he was going to judge the success of Alaska based on whether we could get some sort of ceasefire. And we haven't gotten that yet. So I think Zelensky was right to reiterate that. He also talked about the Ukrainian constitution. Your viewers should understand he can't just walk in there and say, okay, sounds good. Let's give the Russians, these 4 oblasts and Crimea. No, because they're a democracy. Yes, an imperfect democracy, but a democracy. And they have a constitution, just like we have a constitution. There's a little different. Theirs describes in their constitution what is part of Ukraine, down to each region and area. And that same constitution says that cannot be changed without a full vote of the Ukrainian people. Sounding like a democracy, right? So he's going to have whatever agreement is reached to abide by their constitution as a democratic leader as opposed to an autocrat and authoritarian. He's going to need to take that back and get the support of the Ukrainian people. And then there at the end, he was reiterated 2 last points, the value of the trilateral arrangement. What I see my previous comments about, Ukraine should always be at the table when the topic is Ukraine. Imagine that. And he also talked about the need for consequences. And that is my primary respectful criticism of the Trump administration. It's not a partisan criticism. It's not a petty or criticism. It's just, I want the best for our interests and I want the best for Ukraine. And I worry that the warning of consequences that are not implemented or delayed forever simply makes us weak and undermines President Trump's negotiating position.
Well, as you said, and as the reports are today, if today goes well, the White House is hoping for that trilateral meeting where it's President Trump along with Russian President Putin and the Ukrainian President, Mr. Zelensky, all standing together. Can you imagine that, Brad Bowman?
That would be quite an image, right? I got to be honest with you that the images from Alaska were kind of jarring for me. Vladimir Putin, given what he has done here, the roughly 1.5 million casualties on the Russian-Ukrainian sides as a result of this self-aggrandizing war of conquest. The war crimes and crimes against humanity in Bucha, the abduction of thousands of Ukrainian children, the destruction, according to a UN entity, of at least 150 churches, and by some counts more than 600 churches in Ukraine. He's presenting himself as the defender of Orthodox Christianity and tradition while he's blowing up churches all around Ukraine. It was a little hard for me to stomach to see him walking on the red carpet. And a handshake treating him like, this is just another leader visiting. I can only imagine how Ukrainians must have felt looking at that, given what they've been going through at his hands. But when in international diplomacy, when you're a leader of a nation state, sometimes you have to meet with some unsavory foreign leaders to do what's necessary for our country and its interests. So it certainly would be a remarkable image to see those three individuals standing side by side. But most wars end with some sort of diplomacy, and when you can't resolve it on the battlefield, you got to go back to the diplomatic table. How you go to the diplomatic table matters. The shadow of power cast over that diplomatic table, as I keep saying, matters. Russia understands that. That's why they're continuing their attacks. Saying matters. Russia understands that. That's why they're continuing their attacks. Yet we have consequences that we're reluctant to impose, so they kind of get that, and sometimes I worry that we don't. But no doubt, it would be a remarkable development, a historic development to have that trilateral meeting. And my hope is that what we have here today is a unified message of strength that empowers President Trump and helps Ukraine, because that's in our national security interest, and that the next step is a trilateral meeting where President Trump is not portraying himself as like a neutral negotiator, but as someone who is on the side of Ukraine, the invaded, against Russia, the invader, and makes clear that we will only support a plan that is supported by Ukraine, and that American power and prestige will stand behind it, with our European allies right at our side, carrying most of the burden and an increasing portion of the burden over time. That's what I would hope for.
As we wait for the Ukrainian president, what is it that Ukraine would like for them to come to the table? And any sort of peace deal, what does it need to look like for Ukraine?
Yeah, well, Ukraine obviously would like the invaders to go home, stop killing Ukrainians, and leave. But that's not going to happen, because we know Vladimir Putin, the guy that invaded Georgia in 2008 and Crimea and in 2014 and started all the Donbass in 2014, and then did what he did in 2022 and continues to attack Ukrainians right now, attack and kill Ukrainians in their homes right now as we speak. That's what Ukrainians want, but they're not going to get it from Vladimir Putin, because he's trying to reconstitute as much of the Soviet Union as he can, and so here we are. It's just a reminder, right? I'm all for diplomacy and development matter. I'm a big proponent of a well-resourced and empowered Department of State and development. But in the end, when things are not resolved with soft power, history tells us that hard power is preeminent. And that's what we're seeing on full display, that really underscores the importance of the United States to maintain its military power, because in the end, what is said and what is written will only hold if predators like Putin believe that there's hard power backing it up. That's what history tells us. That's what a objective reading of Vladimir Putin's history and his more than 15 years in the KGB tells us. So Ukraine wants the invaders to leave and go home and stop killing innocent men, women, and children. That's not going to happen. So what we're engaged in here today at the White House, what we're seeing these leaders engaging in is what can we accomplish that protects our transatlantic and our individual national interests that is actually achievable. That's the essential question. And anyone who's kind of sit on the sideline and has got easy solutions and is quick to criticize, you don't understand how hard this is. This is incredibly difficult.
Brad Bowman, I want to share with our viewers and you this video just posted on X by Mr. Zelensky. He was at the Ukrainian embassy here in Washington, D.C., 30 minutes ago, greeting the European leaders over at that embassy. Get a sneak peek at his attire, which is being reported on today. You can see he's wearing the black jacket ahead of today's meeting with the president and the European leaders, all of them gathering first at the Ukrainian embassy here in the United States. Brad Bowman, your thoughts?
Yeah, I focus on foreign policy and national security, so I'll leave the fashion criticisms to others. But looks like a perfectly fine outfit to me. And more important than that, I see a show of unity here, and this should not. President Trump should not view this as a threat. He should view this as our allies come into town, united with us to pursue our combined transatlantic interest. He should view this as empowering him, making and supporting his peace through strength policy. These allies are our friends. They've stood by us, many of them for decades or centuries, and they're coming to talk with President Trump in respect, with common interest, eyeing a common adversary who's engaged in the worst war in Europe since World War II. So this is an opportunity for unity and strength that reinforces President Trump's peace through strength policy. I hope he views it that way, because that's what's the opportunity here. Vladimir Putin hopes that he sees that as a threat. He hopes that he sees that as something negative, which it is not, so that he can divide us and weaken us so that we're more susceptible to his predation.
All right, we'll go to Chris, who's been waiting in Boston, Democratic caller. Chris, we are waiting for the Ukrainian president to arrive. What are your thoughts ahead of this meeting?
Yeah, hello. Yeah, my viewpoint is that the original sin was committed by the United States when in 1990, then Secretary of State James Baker promised Gorbachev that in exchange for the reunification of Germany, NATO would not extend 1 inch eastward. That was the original sin. And it's no wonder that Putin's throwing a hissy fit, because the Russians kept their part of the bargain. As soon as the Warsaw Pact collapsed, the United States actively recruited every one of those countries until they were the United States and NATO was up on the Russian border. There is if you
Chris,
Google,
I'm going to have our guest Brad Bowman jump in on your thoughts there.
Yeah, no, thanks for the call, sir. I appreciate it. This is a point that comes up regularly, that has been regularly debunked. There were informal discussions, but there was no formal official U.S. government commitment to not expand NATO. And it's, in fact, on the contrary, it's been NATO's open door has been an explicit policy. And let's think about that. What is that explicit policy? Is that any member of any country in the region can apply to join NATO based on their desire to join and the desire of their democratic elected leaders. And so I guess, sir, what you're implicitly supporting there is that Vladimir Putin should have a veto over what the foreign policy of other countries. So you're arguing for a might makes right sphere of influence where Vladimir Putin should have called the shots for Eastern European countries. I don't agree with that. I think each nation state should be able to make its own decision and decide how it wants to conduct its foreign policy and whether it wants to apply to join the alliance. And that's exactly what they did. And why did they do that, sir? It's not because they wanted to have someone cool to toast at cocktail parties. is because they viewed Russia as a threat and they wanted to join the alliance to defend themselves and increase the capability of their militaries, not for the purpose of attacking Russia, but to defend themselves. And, the only time that NATO has declared Article 5 was after the United States was attacked on 9/11. And let me remind Americans, that's the only time. And more than 1,000 of our allies paid the ultimate sacrifice in Afghanistan. We were attacked. They weren't attacked, but they stepped up to the plate. They invoked Article 5, and some of them stuck with us for the full 20 years down to the last days, and more than 1,000 of them didn't return home. So I stand by what I said. NATO is a defensive alliance. Read it. It's defensive explicitly. It is obviously not a threat to an offensive invasion to Russia. Vladimir Putin knows it. That's why he left his borders next to the Baltic member countries so relatively unguarded for so long. If he believed his own talking points, he would have militarized his border near the Baltics to a much more significant degree. And for many, many years, he didn't. So he doesn't believe his own talking points. Vladimir Putin resents NATO enlargement because it makes it harder for him to bully, coerce, invade, control that country. Because if he picks a fight with that country, he's picked a fight with the United States.
All right.
Yeah, it's as simple as that.
Flags are hoisted at the White House. And then that's a good indication here that we could see Mr. Zelensky's car arriving any moment here at the White House. And now he is arriving at the west wing of the compound here at the White House in Washington. And it means that he'll just have to be able to walk almost directly right into the West Wing when he arrives here at the White House. That differs from the arrival of the European leaders. They were over at the North Portico, and that's a typical arrival spot for our allies when they come to the United States to visit with the president. You saw the red carpet rolled out for those European leaders, the chief of protocol greeting them and bringing them into the White House. Here you have a different scene. The Ukrainian president will arrive, and we don't know who will greet him. We'll see if it's President Trump. And we don't know who will greet him. We'll see if it's President Trump. And the two leaders then are expected to go right into the Oval Office, where they will meet first, the two leaders. And then there will be a family photo with the European leaders and President Trump. And then all three parties will gather together in the East Room for a multilateral meeting at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We expect that reporters will be allowed in for that at the top of that 3 p.m. meeting. There's the car carrying the Ukrainian leader. Let's listen and watch.
Russia continues to attack civilians in Kharkiv, killing many.
Ukrainian President Zelensky has arrived at the White House. You can see, greeted by President Trump. The two gentlemen are just steps away from the Oval Office, arriving at the West Wing of the White House, and then they will go into the Oval Office for a meeting first. The two of them just face to face right after President Trump has met with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday. Here we are on Monday, August 18th. 3 days later, and the two gentlemen are meeting for this historic meeting today here in Washington. Also joining in is the 7 European leaders. They have already arrived at the White House, and they're in a holding pattern here while Mr. Zelensky and Mr. Trump meet. And then all three parties will gather together later this afternoon for a multilateral meeting, all to discuss a potential end to the Russia-Ukraine war. The 7 leaders, European leaders at the White House right now are the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the French President Emmanuel Macron, the Italian Prime Minister, the German Chancellor is there. You also have the Finnish President and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and the NATO Secretary General. They arrived at the White House earlier this afternoon. You heard the president answer a question from reporters when asked about those European leaders. He said, "We love them." You saw a handshake between Mr. Trump and Mr. Zelensky and a pat on the back as well. Brad Bowman, what do you make of the president greeting Mr. Zelensky? He did not greet the European leaders. It was the chief of protocol.
You know, I think it's what one might expect, and it was incredibly positive. I give President Trump credit for doing that. That kind of symbolism matters. It seemed like a cordial greeting. He motioned at him in some way. It'd be interesting to know what he said when he motioned to him. And then he, as you said, he got a couple of questions from reporters. One of the questions I heard was about continued Russian attacks and Ukrainian casualties, and I think that was a good question from the reporter. But it was amicable, and they went in. And bottom line is, we're witnessing history here. This is, for good or ill, a historic moment. And whether it is for good or ill will be determined in what follows, what is said and what follows in terms of tangible action. But I think the consequences of what is decided here today in the next few days and weeks will reverberate around the world for a long time to come. So this is historic and important. And so far, so good. Now let's see what follows.
Well, let's pick up on continued attacks, because Mr. Zelensky, of course, was talking about that ahead of today's meeting, pointing to that as proof that Russia's not interested in any sort of peace deal. What has been happening since Friday in Ukraine?
Right. Yeah. So we have, you know, I made the comment on Friday in Washington Journal that attacks were continuing right up to that meeting, and they've continued since then. We've, we had at least, according to CNN, you had at least 10 killed in attacks in Ukrainian cities, in Zaporizhia, and an attack in Kharkiv city. That's that city which was right near where that funeral was that I talked about in the Washington Journal. You've had overnight drone attacks. According to CNN, over 140 of those Shahed drones. Shahed drones, those are the Iranian drones that Iran provided to Russia to support its invasion of Ukraine. The very same drones that Iran has used to attack U.S. troops and to attack Israel. And so, and Iran has helped Russia build a factory for those very same drones. So the bottom line is that we see the attacks continue and Ukrainians continue to die. And what Putin is doing is very clear.
All right, Brad Bowman, I'm going to jump in. The pool is gathered just right outside the Oval. They're now going in. It's a scrum as they get established inside the room. You can see they need to get their microphones set, their cameras set. Let's listen in.
Between us.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to have the president of Ukraine with us. We've had a lot of good discussions, a lot of good talks, and I think progress is being made, very, very substantial progress in many ways. We had a good meeting, as you know, just a short while ago with the president of Russia. And I think there's a possibility that something could come out of it. And today's meeting is very important. We have, I guess, the seven very powerful leaders from Europe. And we're going to be meeting with them right after this meeting. And thank you very much for being here.
Thanks so much, Mr. President. If I can, first of all, thank you for invitation, and thank you very much for your efforts, personal efforts to stop killings and stop this war. Thank you. And using this opportunity, many thanks to your wife, First Lady of the United States. She sent a letter to Putin about our children, abducted children, and my wife, she, First Lady of Ukraine, she gave the letter. It's not to you, to your wife.
Oh, I want
it. Yeah. So we are saying this sensitive topic, yes, please. And thanks to our partners, and that you supported this format, that after our meeting we can have leaders who are around us, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Finland, EU, NATO, I mean all partners around Ukraine supporting us. Thanks to them, and thank you very much for invitation.
Thank you very much for being here.
President Trump.
Do you think it's
Yes, Peter, go ahead.
Thank you, President Trump. So, President Zelensky, you say in a post on X today, Russia must end this war, which it itself started. President Trump, you say President Zelensky of Ukraine can end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to. Which is it?
No, I think that's true. I think we're going to have a meeting. I think if everything works out well today, we'll have a trilat. And I think there will be a reasonable chance of ending the war when we do that.
And is this the end of the road for American support for Ukraine? Is today's meeting deal or no deal?
I can never say that. It's never the end of the road. People are being killed, and we want to stop that. So I would not say it's the end of the road. No, I think we have a good chance of doing it. It's been almost 4 years now that a lot of people were killed last week. A lot of people last week. I mean, millions of people killed, but a lot of people last week for whatever reason. A big number, a lot of soldiers, on both sides. And I know the president, I know myself, and I believe Vladimir Putin wants to see it ended.
And as you met with Putin on Friday, today you've got President Zelensky here. As you listen to Russia and Ukraine, which side has the better cards? Right?
Well, I don't want to say that. I'm just here to be. Look, this isn't my war. This is Joe Biden's war. He's the one that had a lot to do with this happening, and we want to get it ended. And we want it to end good for everybody. We want it to end good. The people of Ukraine have suffered incredibly.
And to that point, President Zelensky, are you prepared to keep sending Ukrainian troops to their deaths for another couple years, or are you going to agree to redraw the maps?
Thank you for your question. So, first of all, we live under each day attacks. That today have been a lot of attacks and a lot of wounded people, and the child was dead, small one year and a half. So we need to stop this war, to stop Russia, and we need support American and European partners. And we will do our best for this. So, and I think we show that we are strong people, and we supported the idea of the United States, personally of President Trump, to stop this war, to make a diplomatic way of finishing this war, and we are ready for trilateral, as President said. This is a good signal about trilateral. I think this is very good. Thank you.
Mr. President. If the peace deal will be achieved, are you going to be willing to send American peacekeepers to Ukraine?
Well, we're going to work with Ukraine. We're going to work with everybody, and we're going to make sure that if there's peace, the peace is going to stay long term. This is very long term. We're not talking about a 2-year peace and then we end up in this mess again. We're going to make sure that everything's good. We'll work with Russia. We're going to work with Ukraine, and we're going to make sure it works. And I think if we can get to peace, it's going to work. I have no doubt about it.
Your team has talked about security guarantees. Could that involve U.S. troops? Would you roll that out in the future?
We'll let you know that maybe later today. We're meeting with 7 great leaders of great countries also, and we'll be talking about that. They'll all be involved, but there'll be a lot of help when it comes to security. There's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe, but we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved.
Vladimir Putin mentioned that the war will not end without addressing the root causes of this war. Have you had an understanding what are the root causes of this war?
Well, look, the war is going to end. When it ends, I can't tell you, but the war is going to end, and this gentleman wants it to end, and Vladimir Putin wants it to end. I think the whole world is tired of it, and we're going to get it ended. It was, I've done 6 wars. I've ended 6 wars, and I thought this maybe would be the easiest one, and it's not the easiest one. It's a tough one. A lot of reasons for it, and they'll be talking about it for a long time. But they'll be talking about the others. Look, India, Pakistan. We're talking about big places. When you look at, you just take a look at some of these wars. You go to Africa and take a look at that. Rwanda and the Congo, Republic of the Congo. That's been going on for 31 years. And so we've done a total of 6, and we really have 6, not including the fact that we obliterated, and it turned out to be a total obliteration, the nuclear in as you said, the future nuclear capability of Iran. And this one, I think we're going to get solved also. I feel confident we're going to get it solved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can you tell us about your conversations with European leaders and what they need to see to support an end to the war?
Yeah, well, we're going to be meeting with a great representative group and 7 very powerful, very big countries and great people, all friends of mine and friends of yours. And we're going to have some suggestions made. They want to see peace. They would like to see peace.
President Trump,
in the red.
President Trump, do you think it's fair to for Ukraine and for Russia to achieve a lasting and durable peace if Ukraine cedes its territories that Russia hasn't yet conquered?
We're going to have a lasting peace. Just to answer the first part of your question, we're going to have a lasting peace. I hope it's going to be immediately. I hope it doesn't have to go on. And I think people of the whole world is going to be very happy when that's announced.
Mr. President, you posted on social media, Mr. President, a very touching letter from the First Lady. And the letter was hand-delivered to President Putin. And it calls for an end to the war, essentially, because of the children and the children's future. Why did the First Lady feel that letter was necessary? Was it because she believes that Mr. Putin is the aggressor in the war? Is a similar letter being hand-delivered to President Zelensky?
So the First Lady felt very strongly. She's watched the same thing that you watch and that I watch. I see things that you don't get to see, and it's horrible. But when she's got a great love of children, she has a wonderful son that she loves, probably more than anybody, including me. I hate to say it, but she loves her son. She loves children, and she hates to see something like this happening. And that goes for other wars too. I mean, she sees the heartbreak, the parents, the funerals that you see on television. Always funerals. We want to see something other than funerals. No, she felt. It was a beautiful letter. It was very well received by him. And she did ask me to say, she would love to see this end. She would love to see it end. And she says it very openly, very proudly, and with great sorrow because so many people have been killed.
Mr. President, last week,
Brian, go ahead, Brian.
Yes, sir. I've got a question for each of you.
Yes.
First of all, Mr. President Zelensky, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, you look good.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, looks good.
I said the one that attacked you last time. See, now he's
I remember that. Yeah, I apologize to you. You look wonderful. No, my first question for you, President Zelensky.
In the same suit. You see, I changed. You are not.
Maybe yours is much better. Real quickly, upon peace, God willing we get peace, are you open to holding an election in your country?
Yes, of course. We are open for election, yes. We have to do safety circumstances. And a little bit, we need to work in the parliament, because during the war you can't have elections, but we can do security. We need, we need a truth, yes, everywhere, in the battlefield, in the sky, in the sea, to make possible for people to do democratic, open, legal elections.
So you say during the war you can't have elections. So let me just say 3.5 years from now. So you mean if we happen to be in a war with somebody, no more elections? Oh, that's good. I wonder what the fake
news like this idea?
Yeah.
No.
Speaking of news, I got a question for you. This sounds insane for me even to ask this, but do you think the American media really doesn't even want a peace deal because they've been so critical of you every step of the way as you lead the charge for peace?
It's an amazing phenomenon. I said that if in the settlement you got Moscow, St. Petersburg, and thousands of miles around them, they would say I made a bad deal. The level of hatred and animosity is incredible. Not with all. I mean, we have great people up here. We also have terrible people up there that I think are told what to say. But, in solving all of these wars, they don't even write about it. I saw major wars. I saw wars that have been going on for 31, 35, and 37, and a couple of quicker ones. One that was going to go into a full-blown deal very quickly. You know what the one I'm talking about? It was a big one. But they don't even write about that. No matter what I do, no matter what, and you know, this is not anything to do with you. It's probably to your advantage in a certain way. But no matter what I do, no matter what deal I make, from my standpoint, you'll come out good. Maybe President Putin will come out good. But they'll say, Trump was absolutely horrible. It's just that, and I've lived with that for a long time. I've lived with it since just before the first election. I used to get great publicity. Now I get the worst publicity anyone's ever gotten in office, but I won in a landslide, so the people understand. They're the only ones that count, ultimately. But I've also had great reporters. I've had journalists that are very good. But it's very sad when you do the right thing. As an example, they said, because of the fact that Vladimir Putin came to American soil, this was a tremendous defeat for Donald Trump. No, it was really wonderful that he did it. It was a hard thing for him to do, to be honest with you. It was the opposite of what they said, but they said it. Now, if he didn't come, they'd say that was also bad for Trump. You know, there's no way. And there's just a great dishonesty of the press, and I think that's why it's lost its credibility. You know, its credibility is at an all-time low. We have a thing going on right now in D.C. We went from the most unsafe place anywhere to a place that now friends are calling me up, Democrats are calling me up, and they're saying, sir, I want to thank you. My wife and I went out to dinner last night for the first time in 4 years, and Washington, D.C. is safe, and you did that in 4 days. I'll tell you, it's safe. I had another friend of mine. He has a son who's a great golfer. He's on tour, and he came in fourth yesterday in the big tournament where Scotty Scheffler made the great shot. And he said his son is going to dinner in Washington, D.C. tonight. I said, would you have allowed that to happen a year ago? He said, no way. No way. He said, what you've done is incredible. And I think the people realize it. But the press says, he's a dictator. He's trying to take over. No, all I want is security for our people. But people that haven't gone out to dinner in Washington, D.C. in 2 years are going out to dinner. And the restaurants the last 2 days were busier than they've been in a long time.
Sir, I walked around yesterday with MTG. If you could walk around with D.C. with MTG and not be attacked, the city is safe.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week you warned of what you called severe consequences if a 30-day ceasefire or any type of ceasefire were not agreed to by Russia. Will there be severe consequences? Does that change because of
I don't think you need a ceasefire. You know, if you look at the 6 deals that I settled this year, they were all at war. I didn't do any ceasefires. And I know that it might be good to have, but I can also understand strategically why, well, you know, one country or the other wouldn't want it. You have a ceasefire and they rebuild and rebuild and rebuild, and, you know, maybe they don't want that. But if you look at the 6 deals that we made peace and you know, long-term, long-running wars, I didn't do any ceasefires. I like the concept. You know, I like the concept of a ceasefire for one reason, because you'd stop killing people immediately, as opposed to in 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever it takes. But we can work a deal where we're working on a peace deal while they're fighting. They have to fight. I wish they could stop. I'd like them to stop. But strategically, that could be a disadvantage for one side or the other. But all of these deals I made without even the mention of the words ceasefire.
Can you explain the decision to offer Ukraine Article 5-like security guarantees, but stop short of pushing for their full membership?
Yeah, well, we haven't done anything on that yet. If you look back and you go back long before President Putin, it was always a statement that they would never allow Ukraine into NATO. So that was a statement that was made, but we haven't discussed any of that yet. We're going to be discussing it today. But we will give them very good protection, very good security. That's part of it. And the people that are waiting for us, they are, I think they're very like-minded. They want to help out also.
Thank you, President. Thank you, President Trump.
Are you disappointed there's no ceasefire,
The United States has already given hundreds of billions of dollars to this war effort in Ukraine. At best, it is a stalemate, and the killing continues. So, President Trump, How much more is the United States willing to give Ukraine? And President Zelensky, how much more do you want?
Well, I'll start off just by saying we're not giving anything now. We're selling weapons. This is something before, I guess the number is well over $300 billion. That was under Joe Biden, a corrupt politician, not a smart man, never was. By the way, go back 40 years. He was not a smart man 40 years ago either. But now he's in particular bad. This was done by a corrupt administration that shouldn't have been in, and frankly, if the right results of the election were given, if I were president, this war would have never taken place, and he would have been very happy, because he would have liked to have seen. I mean, they went through hell. He went through hell. This war would have never happened, and the people that were killed, a couple of million people, a lot of people with soldiers and everything else, and the people that have been displaced and forced into other areas and other countries because of what's happened, none of that would have happened. And I'm just saying that he was a horrible president. Whether it was the borders or this, he was just a horrible, corrupt president.
Mr. President, I can't think so much. So first of all, we have possibility now to buy weapons from the United States. We are thankful for this program and this opportunity. We are thankful for Europe. They pay for this. And through NATO program, for example, Pearl and etc., we have some programs where we can have some money to finance this. And this is a part, I think, it's not a part for the war and to defend us. It also will be a part for security guarantees, to strengthen our army, to rearm Ukrainian army. This is very, very important. And it depends how much money we need to rearm. For example, the question of air defense, we spoke about it with President Trump, and I'm happy that we have now bilateral decisions and we work on it with production, American production. Nobody in Europe has so many air defense like Patriots, for example. We need it very much, and this is also about defending.
I think the good news, we make the best military equipment in the world by far. You mentioned the Patriots. How good are they?
Systems.
We have systems, they're literally 100% foolproof. And it's really like shooting two bullets. You know, two bullets hitting each other in the air in a space like this. The chance is 100%. It's 99 to 100%. So we sell the equipment to NATO. And NATO does what, I don't know what the arrangement is that you have with, but I know that they want you to have the equipment. And we're getting the best equipment in the world, but they pay us for the equipment. Under Biden, it was just crazy what was going on. I believe the number is over 300. I think it could be $350 billion worth of equipment and money and everything else. And we've made more progress in settling this war in the last 2 months than they made in 4 years. This should have been settled a long time ago, but it should have never happened. Yeah, please.
Real quickly, you pushed out on social media.
Brian, go first.
You pushed out on social media about doing away with mail-in ballots and potentially electronic voting machines. Can you expand on that and how important
Well, that's a very off-topic, just really quickly. Mail-in ballots are corrupt. Mail-in ballots, you can never have a real democracy with mail-in ballots. And we, as a Republican Party, are going to do everything possible that we get rid of mail-in ballots. We're going to start with an executive order that's being written right now by the best lawyers in the country to end mail-in ballots because they're corrupt. And you know that we're the only country in the world, I believe, I may be wrong, but just about the only country in the world that uses them because of what's happened. Massive fraud all over the place. The other thing we want change are the machines. For all of the money they spend, it's approximately 10 times more expensive than paper ballots. And paper ballots are very sophisticated with the watermark paper and everything else. We would get secure elections. We'd get much faster results. The machines, I mean, they say we're going to have the results in 2 weeks. With paper ballots, you have the results that night. Most people, many countries use paper ballots. It's the most secure form. So between paper ballots, very, very important, paper ballots, and I think maybe even more important, the mail-in voting. We're going to end mail-in voting. It's a fraud. If you have mail-in vote, even Jimmy Carter with this commission, they set it up. He said the one thing about mail-in voting, You will never have an honest election if you have mail-in. And it's time that the Republicans get tough and stop it, because the Democrats want it. It's the only way they can get elected. Because with men and women's sports and with transgender for everybody and open borders and all of the horrible things, and now the new thing is they love crime. They're fighting me on the fact that I've made Washington, D.C. safe. We're not going to get mugged, beaten up, or killed like all the people you've been watching get so badly hurt. I'm glad. I hate to take your time in this, but I'm glad you asked me that question. We're going to stop mail-in ballots because it's corrupt. You know, when you go to a voting booth and you do it the right way and you go to a state that runs it properly, you go in. They even ask me. They asked me for my license plate, for identity. I said, I don't know if I have it. They said, sir, you have to have it. I was very impressed, actually. But it's very hard to cheat with mail-in voting. As you know what happens in California, it's so corrupt, where some people get 5, 6, 7 ballots delivered to them. Now, we got to stop mail-in voting, and the Republicans have to lead the charge. The Democrats want it because they have horrible policy. If you have mail-in voting, you're not going to have many Democrats get elected. That's bigger than anything having to do with redistricting, believe me. And the Republicans have to get smart. We're not going to have a country. I said for a long time at rallies, you need borders and you need free and fair elections. Those two things. Otherwise, you don't have. We have strong borders now. In 90 days, Mr. President, we didn't have 1, 0, 0, and 3 months. Not one person came in illegally into our country. In fact, even I find that hard to believe, but it's run by a little bit of a liberal group that put out the numbers, so I guess it's, but 0, 0, and 0. You go back a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 millions of people poured into our country. It was terrible. Thank you very much.
What security guarantees do you need from President Trump to be able to make a deal? Is it American troops, intelligence, equipment? What is it?
Everything. And really, it includes two parts. First, strong Ukrainian army. That's what I began to discuss with your colleagues. And it's a lot about weapon and people and training missions and intelligence. And second, we will discuss with our partners. It depends on the big countries, on the United States, on a lot of our friends.
And Mr. President, are you willing to commit American troops to that NATO-like protection in order to get President Zelensky to a deal today?
Well, I don't know if you define it that way, but NATO-like, I mean, we have people waiting in another room right now. They're all here from Europe, biggest people in Europe, and they want to give protection. They feel very strongly about it, and we'll help them out with that. I think it's very important. I think it's very important to get the deal done.
You've been involved with the peacekeeping in Ukraine since your first day in the administration. What would you say to the Ukrainian people right now who are suffering under the Russian attacks and hoping that the American people will stand with them?
Well, I know Ukrainian people. I've known many over the years. They're great people. They're smart. They're energetic. They love their country. I mean, they love their country, and we want to get this war ended. That's all I can do. I love the Ukrainian people, but I love all people. I love the Russian people. I love them all. I want to get the war stopped. Very important.
Was there any aspect of your discussion with Vladimir Putin that left you disappointed?
Look, we just spoke to, I was just telling the president, I just spoke to President Putin indirectly, and we're going to have a phone call right after these meetings today. And we may or may not have a trilat. If we don't have a trilat, then the fighting continues. And if we do, we have a good chance. I think if we have a trilat, there's a good chance of maybe ending it. But he's expecting my call when we're finished with this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, press. Thank you. Keep moving.
President Trump there calling an end to the reporters' questions inside the Oval Office with President Zelensky, and you can see the cabinet officials sitting to the president's left there, Mr. Zelensky's team with him as well, all in the Oval Office, as they now go behind closed doors without the media there to discuss an end to the Russia-Ukraine war. It's our live coverage here on C-SPAN this afternoon, and we want all of you to be part of it as well. Let's get your reaction to what you just heard in the Oval Office from President Trump and President Zelensky. Republicans dial in at 202-748-8920. Democrats 202-748-8921. And all others, your line, 202-748-8922. You can text if you don't want to call at 202-748-8903. Just include your first name, city, and state. Brad Bowman, who is with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, has been with us this afternoon as well. Brad Bowman, I want to begin with what CNN is highlighting here from this meeting, and that is that the president did not rule out defending Ukraine. That was the banner headline that they had up there at the end of that meeting. He said it was the 7 leaders, the European leaders that are at the White House right now, would be involved in any security guarantees for Ukraine because they're the first line of defense. But then he said we would be involved as well.
I agree. That is one of the more significant top 2 or 3 takeaways from this historic Oval Office discussion that we've just witnessed, that went, from my perspective, much better than the last one. I would say the big takeaway is that you have President Trump, with everything he's has said in the past, contemplating the idea of the United States adding its political heft and military muscle behind a peace agreement and helping to ensure that there aren't subsequent Russian attacks on what remains of Ukraine alongside our European allies. That's a big deal. That's a very big deal that he would contemplate that and not rule that out. Very significant. There was also one other quote that he said later on in the discussion, where he said, if I got the quote right, and folks can check me on this, quote, "I don't think you need a ceasefire," end quote, but it might be good to have one. He followed up quickly thereafter. That obviously would be, for supporters of Ukraine, one of the more disappointing things that was said, because really what Ukraine wants, what our European allies want, and what I think is in the American national security interest is an immediate, full, unconditional ceasefire. So the president said that, and then he kind of said, well, it would be nice if we could get one. So I think that might get some headlines that he said that, but it's important that people read the full discussion. He kind of dialed it back a little bit. But just like last time, you had the vice president there on the couch to the president's left, our right. You had the Secretary of State Rubio, you had Steve Witkoff, and then you had Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth standing behind the couch. And so a lot of the same cast of leaders, if you will, but no interjections this time from the vice president or others on the couch. That was significant. None of the yelling, none of the vitriol. Much more unified. Both leaders clearly were trying to avoid any missteps that would prevent progress. So I think that was laudable. And you saw Zelensky saying he really wanted to stop the killing. You saw President Trump reiterating that. And now they're going to go into that room and talk, and what is decided there will be very, very important.
And you heard right off the top, Ukrainian President Zelensky thank the president, thank the United States. That was a point of contention the last time the two of them were in the Oval Office with J.D. Vance, as you pointed out, the Vice President of the United States. You also heard the president talk about root causes. He was asked about root causes, and he said it has to end, it will end. And what did you make of that, his response to the questions of the root causes here?
Yeah, I'm glad you highlighted that. That's one of the other things I meant to mention a moment ago. There were several reporter questions where they were really getting at that kind of fundamental issue. Who's to blame was one question, essentially. Who holds the cards? We know why that was asked based on comments in the Oval Office last time. You got the root causes question. You got a version of, is Putin the aggressor? And so there was a clear desire from reporters to try to get the president to express his latest view on who started this thing and who's at fault and who's got the power and who doesn't. These are kind of questions that generate headlines and maybe create some mischief. And by and large, the president didn't take the bait from my perspective, But there were some of his comments that suggested, maybe implicitly, that there's a moral equivalence here between the invaded and invader. I would have loved to hear him more clearly say that, yes, Putin started this war and he should stop it. We should have an unconditional, immediate ceasefire. He didn't push as assertively for that as I would like. But he also avoided some of the statements that he's made in the past that really explicitly suggested a false moral equivalence. So on balance, I think this went about as well as you could expect. And it sets the table nicely, if you will, for follow-on discussions. And I was very happy to see President Trump talking about our powerful allies from Europe. He's exactly right; they're powerful. And so before this, I said we're very positive talks here. Let's hope that concrete policies come out of it to try to help Ukraine and impose real-world consequences on Putin until he stops this war of choice.
You also heard the president say following these meetings, he will be calling the Russian president. There will be a phone call between those two leaders in hopes of a trilateral meeting. But he said if that happens, there will be an end to the possible, likelihood of an end to the war if there's a trilateral meeting. If not, he said the war won't end.
Right. No, to get this war to end, you got to get Vladimir Putin to stop invading and attacking Ukraine. And so it seems very reasonable at this point that President Trump would reach out to Vladimir Putin to do that until he's had the discussion with Zelensky today and European leaders, and that they come up with a unified policy and strategy that all of them are behind so they can speak with one voice, because the president's leverage will be at its zenith if he can build a coalition and consensus around it and speak with one voice. That would make him more, not less effective in his negotiations with Vladimir Putin.
Let's get to our viewers and see what they think of this Oval Office meeting. Jean in New Jersey, Independent. Jean, go ahead.
Hi.
Share with us. Were you able to watch that interaction there and the statements by the two presidents in the Oval today?
Yes, I was, and I think it dovetails well with the question I was going to ask Mr. Bowman. As you noticed, the first question to President Trump was regarding the root causes, and yesterday Marco Rubio was also asked the same question on Face the Nation, and both of them, both Mr. Rubio and Mr. Trump, they sort of skirted the question, as Mr. Bowman had said. And I'm wondering, in some way, they're kind of casting themselves as very pragmatic and perhaps frustrated or impatient with, going into the history of it. They just want to get it solved. And Mr. Rubio made a great point about the fact that, both sides are going to have to make concessions. So I guess my question for Mr. Bowman is, what realistically, if the current administration looks that both sides need to make concessions, what are the realistic concessions that Ukraine's willing to make, and what do you think could come out of the meeting?
All right, we'll take that.
Thanks for your comments, and thanks for the call and the very good question. You're asking the $1 million question, if you will, there. And I got to be honest with you, I don't enjoy speaking about the concessions that Ukraine needs to make. I mean, I don't want to overdo the metaphors here, but I spoke on Friday about how essentially this is equivalent to a home invasion. Criminal home invasion make concessions by giving up their living room so the home invader doesn't take the rest of the house. I mean, it's really unseemly that we would even suggest that. Yet, Ukraine has not been able to take back some of the territory that Russians have stolen, including, of course, Crimea, but also almost all of in terms of occupying it currently, almost all of Luhansk, much of Donetsk, and much of Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblast. And so that brings us back to the negotiating table. And so Vladimir Putin would very much like to lock in what he's stolen and get a little bit more at the diplomatic table, that which he hasn't been able to get in Donetsk on the battlefield, as President Zelensky highlighted. And he'd like to leave Ukraine as weak as possible so they can come back for more later. And so that's where these security assurances and the role of the United States is really, really important. But in the end, I'll just end with this, that the Ukrainian constitution requires that any sort of land concessions be put to a vote of the Ukrainian people. So if they follow their constitution, which I hope as a democracy they will, just as we should follow our constitution, that Zelensky will try to make the best deal he can with the support of the United States and his European allies, and get some sort of assurances from Putin. I won't trust them myself, and then take that back to the Ukrainian people and put it to a vote and see what they say. But you can imagine how they must feel after so many tens of thousands of deaths and casualties. The idea of giving up land to an invader who's conducting this naked aggression, that just must be very difficult for the Ukrainian people.
At the White House right now, the staff is preparing for what they call a family photo. That is when the 7 European leaders will gather right there in the cross hall at the White House. You can see the 7 flags plus the American flag. That is flags from the UK, from France. You've got the Finnish flag there. You also have the German flag, the flag for NATO, as well as the European Commission, and Italy, of course, as well. So the 7 European leaders listed, as I just listed, along with the president, they will line up for a family photo. We're expecting that around 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And then all parties will gather together again in the East Room. And this time it'll be Mr. Zelensky with the 7 European leaders and Mr. Trump. And the reporters will possibly get another chance at more questions for these leaders as they gather in the East Room ahead of a meeting. So the public will get 2 more shots here at seeing this meeting unfolding at the White House. Brad Bowman is with us here to talk about this meeting as well. So, Brad Bowman, do you think the Russian president is watching today?
I would be surprised if he's not. Certainly his top advisors are. And I got to believe that they're not happy. I think, I know they were very happy after Alaska. They're probably not happy now. I'm sure they see some opportunity. They're probably grateful for President Trump's comment about not needing or wanting a ceasefire. They're probably going to try to make hay with that. But generally speaking, they would have liked to see another yelling match. They would have liked to see Zelensky portrayed as the obstacle to peace and the problem. You're trying to flip the script. But credit to President Trump, he didn't fall into that Putin trap. They both were clearly making some effort to be on their best behavior and avoid any drama. And by and large, they succeeded. And so I would say that the Kremlin is looking at the conversation as not going well from their perspective, going very well from an American and Ukrainian perspective. And this image that we're about to see with all of these powerful leaders, led by President Trump, and there was Zelensky, is going to present a very positive image, right? This is positive imaging that will empower President Trump, present a unified image, and help us give it a better chance of getting a positive outcome at the negotiating table. So I would say more of this, less of what we saw earlier this year, less of what we saw in Alaska, and more consequences for Putin, more aid for Ukraine. That's how you're going to empower President Trump's negotiating and help him achieve a peace through strength policy that serves American interest in Ukraine.
All right, let's hear from Vincent, who's in New Rochelle, New York, independent. Vincent, what did you think of that interaction in the Oval Office today?
Well, I think it was positive, and I agree with some of the commentary. Of course, Putin, I'm sure, would have liked to have seen him blow up, but that didn't happen. But Trump is successfully, I think, moving across the global stage with various peace initiatives. Putin, of course, like Xi Jinping and the other dictators around the world, are really hoping to just wait out his presidency so they can get another incompetent presidency coming in. Not to put a big spin on it, but I think that's really what their hope is. Now,
hey Vincent, I'm going to have Brad Bowman take that. I'm going to have Brad Bowman take that last point, Vincent. Brad Bowman, go ahead.
No, thanks, Vincent, for the call. You're raising some important issues there. Now, let's just think about this for a moment. Let's say that in the next few days or weeks, we get the perfect deal from an American national security interest standpoint. It involves some sort of commitment to stand with our European allies to help Ukraine. Okay, well, that is going to need to hold long after President Trump leaves office. And the next president could be a Republican or it could be a Democrat. So these commitments need to enjoy bipartisan support here in Washington if they're going to be effective and sustainable, right? So that's one reason why I always respectfully kind of push back on the excess. This last call was perfectly fine and wonderful. I'm not criticizing the caller, but I'm saying that's why I push back on some of the more partisan tone. That is not me. I had criticism for President Biden, having this no, maybe yes dynamic and slow rolling some assistance for the big weapon systems. But if we're going to have whatever we commit to here, we're going to have to be able to implement this for years and even decades to come. And so that means you got to build bipartisan support for it so that you don't have the next administration just undercutting it or saying whatever. And obviously Zelensky and our European allies are going to want the same thing. So in addition to, I'd say, a very positive job by President Trump today in this discussion overall, I really hope that he's making an effort on Capitol Hill to do bipartisan outreach to build consensus around a solution that will enjoy bipartisan support for years to come. Otherwise, it will not work, and it will not be trusted, and Vladimir Putin will exploit the differences.
All right, we're going to go to Bakersfield, California. Beverly's a Democrat. Hi, Beverly.
Hi.
What's your question or comment here?
Well, my comment is I don't understand why Trump keeps acting like Biden started the war in Ukraine. Biden didn't start it. Putin started it.
All right, Beverly, we'll take that point, Brad Bowman, because you heard the president talk about it in the Oval. He was asked, and he said this is Joe Biden's war. At this point, though, when the president tries to negotiate peace, does he own it now?
Yes. And, I was going back and looking at the conversation in Washington Journal, and we got several calls in a row where, they wanted me to criticize one president more than the other. And, and I wish I had said the following, and I'll say it now. Like in your personal life, you can, or, when you take the baton from someone on some issue or some challenge, at some point, you got to kind of own it, right? Like how many months or years into the Trump administration can you still try to blame the previous administration? I would say the same thing for a Democratic administration. I think, President Trump handed President Biden not a great situation in Afghanistan, and then President Biden made it much, much worse. And so President Biden can't blame his withdrawal from Afghanistan on Trump. He can say Trump dealt him a bad hand, but Biden made it much, much worse. So kind of in your personal life, and, if we're just 3 years into the Trump second term, are we still going to be blaming Biden? It's absolutely true that the deterrence failure happened on President Biden's watch. They failed to deter the largest war in Europe since World War II. That is true. What is also true, the Biden administration undertook a really impressive security assistance campaign to help Ukraine continue to exist, even though they did this no baby yes dynamic that I've criticized. So that's the reality. So, can we just, the reason I'm focusing on Trump is because he's the president of the United States. President Biden is not the president of the United States. So I'm saying let's look at the president we have and recommend policies that will support the American interest. Yes, he was dealt a bad hand, but here we are. So what do we do about it?
Brad Bowman, final thoughts here from you this afternoon. What will you be watching for ahead of that or at the top of that multilateral meeting later today around 3 p.m. Eastern time?
Thank you. I'm going to be watching whether Russia continues its attacks. I think they will. I'll be watching what the messaging that comes out of this meeting today. To what degree is this unified front perpetuated? To what degree do we have tangible European commitments on security assistance? What role is the United States going to play in that? Will we continue just to sell weapons to Europeans to deliver in the Ukraine? Or are we going to restore some U.S. funding, which we can absolutely afford to help Ukraine? And if Vladimir Putin is not responsive, will President Trump finally make good on some of his warning and impose some consequences? And so those are a few of the things I'll be watching. But the stakes are high here. So far, so good from an American perspective today. Now the devil will be in the details. Are we going to stand by Ukraine, who's enduring the worst invasion since World War II, and are we going to impose consequences on Vladimir Putin, the aggressor? Those are the key things I'm going to be watching.
Brad Bowman is with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. We thank you for your time this afternoon and appreciate your insight.
Thank you so much.
All right, and we're going to continue live coverage here on C-SPAN this afternoon of this historic meeting at the White House that is underway right now. The president in the Oval Office with Mr. Zelensky, the Ukrainian president. The two of them talking earlier today with their staff in the Oval Office room, and you heard from the reporters as well. Right now, they are having a meeting before the president then meets up with the 7 European leaders who arrived at the White House earlier today. We will get a, quote, family photo of the president along with those 7 European leaders around 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, right there on your screen in the cross hall at the White House. And then everyone will travel to the East Room at the White House, where Mr. Zelensky, Mr. Trump, and the 7 European leaders will all gather for a meeting there to talk about an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine. While we wait for more opportunities to see the president with these leaders, we'll bring you back to the Oval Office from earlier today when the president and Mr. Zelensky took questions from the media.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to have the president of Ukraine with us. We've had a lot of good discussions, a lot of good talks, and I think progress is being made, very substantial progress in many ways. We had a good meeting, as you know, just a short while ago with the president of Russia, and I think there's a possibility that something could come out of it, and today's meeting is very important. We have, I guess, the seven very powerful leaders from Europe, and we're going to be meeting with them right after this meeting, and thank you very much for being here.
Thanks so much, Mr. President. If I can, first of all, thank you for invitation, and thank you very much for your efforts, personal efforts to stop killings and stop this war. Thank you, and using this opportunity, many thanks to your wife, First Lady of the United States. She sent a letter to Putin about our children, abducted children, and my wife, she, First Lady of Ukraine, she gave the letter. It's not to you, to your wife.
Oh, I want it.
Yeah. So we are saying this is a sensitive topic. Yes, please. And thanks to our partners and that you supported this format, that after our meeting we can have leaders who are around us, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Finland, EU, NATO, I mean all partners around Ukraine supporting us. Thanks them, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much for being here.
President Trump.
Do you think it's fair?
Yes, Peter. Go ahead.
Thank you, President Trump. So, President Zelensky, you say in a post on X today, Russia must end this war, which it itself started. President Trump, you say President Zelensky of Ukraine can end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to. Which is it?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think we're going to have a meeting. I think if everything works out well today, we'll have a trilat. And I think there will be a reasonable chance of ending the war when we do that.
And is this the end of the road for American support for Ukraine? Is today's meeting deal or no deal?
I can never say that. It's never the end of the road. People are being killed, and we want to stop that. So I would not say it's the end of the road. No, I think we have a good chance of doing it. It's been almost 4 years now that a lot of people were killed last week. A lot of people last week. I mean, millions of people killed, but a lot of people last week for whatever reason. A big number, a lot of soldiers, on both sides. And I know the president, I know myself, and I believe Vladimir Putin wants to see it ended.
And as you met with Putin on Friday, today you've got President Zelensky here. As you listen to Russia and Ukraine, which side has the better cards right now?
I don't want to say that. I'm just here to be. Look, this isn't my war. This is Joe Biden's war. He's the one that had a lot to do with this happening, and we want to get it ended. And we want it to end good for everybody. We want it to end good. The people of Ukraine have suffered incredibly.
And to that point, President Zelensky, are you prepared to keep sending Ukrainian troops to their deaths for another couple years, or are you going to agree to redraw the maps?
Thank you for your question. So, first of all, we live under each day attacks. You know that today have been a lot of attacks and a lot of wounded people, and the child was dead, small one year and a half. So we need to stop this war, to stop Russia, and we need support American and European partners. And we will do our best for this. So, and I think we show that we are strong people, and we supported the idea of the United States, of personally of President Trump, to stop this war, to make a diplomatic way of finishing this war, and we are ready for trilateral, as President said. This is a good signal about trilateral. I think this is very good. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes, if the peace deal will be achieved, are you going to be willing to send American peacekeepers to Ukraine?
Well, we're going to work with Ukraine. We're going to work with everybody, and we're going to make sure that if there's peace, the peace is going to stay long term. This is very long term. We're not talking about a 2-year peace and then we end up in this mess again. We're going to make sure that everything's good. We'll work with Russia. We're going to work with Ukraine. And we're going to make sure it works. And I think if we can get to peace, it's going to work. I have no doubt about it.
President Zelensky,
go ahead. Your team has talked about security guarantees. Could that involve U.S. troops? Would you roll that out in the future?
We'll let you know that maybe later today. We're meeting with 7 great leaders of great countries also, and we'll be talking about that. They'll all be involved, but there'll be a lot of help when it comes to security. There's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe, but we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved. Yes.
Vladimir Putin mentioned that the war will not end without addressing the root causes of this war. Have you had an understanding what are the root causes of this war?
Well, look, the war is going to end. When it ends, I can't tell you, but the war is going to end, and this gentleman wants it to end, and Vladimir Putin wants it to end. I think the whole world is tired of it, and we're going to get it ended. It was, I've done 6 wars. I've ended 6 wars, and I thought this maybe would be the easiest one. And it's not the easiest one. It's a tough one. A lot of reasons for it, and they'll be talking about it for a long time. But they'll be talking about the others. Look, India, Pakistan. We're talking about the big places. When you look at, you just take a look at some of these wars. You go to Africa and take a look at that. Rwanda and the Congo, Republic of the Congo. That's been going on for 31 years. And so we've done a total of 6, and we really have 6, not including the fact that we obliterated, and it turned out to be a total obliteration, the nuclear, as you said, the future nuclear capability of Iran. And this one, I think we're going to get solved also. I feel confident we're going to get it solved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can you tell us about your conversations with European leaders and what they need to see to support an end to the war?
Well, we're going to be meeting with a great representative group and 7 very powerful, very big countries, and great people, all friends of mine and friends of yours. And we're going to have some suggestions made. They want to see peace. They would like to see peace.
What did Russia give up? You said last night that...
President Trump, do you think it's fair to for Ukraine and for Russia to achieve a lasting and durable peace if Ukraine cedes its territories that Russia hasn't yet conquered? Do you think it's a fair peace for Ukraine?
We're going to have a lasting peace. Just to answer the first part of your question, we're going to have a lasting peace. I hope it's going to be immediately. I hope it doesn't have to go on. And I think people of the whole world is going to be very happy when that's announced.
Thank you, Mr. President. You posted on social media, Mr. President, a very touching letter from the First Lady. And the letter was hand-delivered to President Putin. And it calls for an end to the war, essentially, because of the children and the children's future. Why did the First Lady feel that letter was necessary? Was it because she believes that Mr. Putin is the aggressor in the war? Is a similar letter being hand-delivered to President Zelensky?
So the First Lady felt very strongly. She's watched the same thing that you watch and that I watch. I see things that you don't get to see, and it's horrible. But when she's got a great love of children, she has a wonderful son that she loves, probably more than anybody, including me. I hate to say it, but she loves her son. She loves children. and she hates to see something like this happening. And that goes for other wars too. I mean, she sees the heartbreak, the parents, the funerals that you see on television. Always funerals. We want to see something other than funerals. No, she felt it was a beautiful letter. It was very well received by him, and she did ask me to say, she would love to see this end. She would love to see it end, and she says it very openly, very proudly, and with great sorrow because so many people have been killed.
Last week,
Mr. President.
Yes, sir. I've got a question for each of you. First of all, Mr. President Zelensky, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, you look good.
I said the same thing.
Yeah.
Isn't that nice? That's the one that attacked you last time. See, now
I remember that.
I apologize to you. You look wonderful. No, my first question for you, President Zelensky.
In the same suit. You see, I changed.
Maybe yours is much better than mine. Real quickly, upon peace, God willing we get peace, are you open to holding an election in your country?
Yes, of course. We are open for election, yes. We have to do safety circumstances. And a little bit, we need to work in the parliament, because during the war you can't have elections, but we can do security. We need, we need a truth, yes, everywhere, in the battlefield, in the sky, in the sea, to make possible for people to do democratic, open, legal elections.
So you say during the war you can't have elections. So let me just say 3.5 years from now, so you mean if we happen to be in a war with somebody, no more elections? Oh, that's good. I wonder what the fake
You like this idea?
No. Speaking of news, I got a question for you. This sounds insane for me even to ask this, but do you think the American media really doesn't even want a peace deal because they've seen they've been so critical of you every step of the way as you lead the charge for peace?
It's an amazing phenomenon. I said that if in the settlement you got Moscow, St. Petersburg, and thousands of miles around them, they would say, I made a bad deal. The level of hatred and animosity is incredible. Not with all. I mean, we have great people up here. We also have terrible people up there that I think are told what to say. But, in solving all of these wars, they don't even write about it. I saw major wars. I saw wars that have been going on for 31, 35, and 37, and a couple of quicker ones. One that was going to go into a full-blown deal very quickly. You know what the one I'm talking about. It was a big one. But they don't even write about that. No matter what I do, no matter what, and this is not anything to do with you. It's probably to your advantage in a certain way. But no matter what I do, no matter what deal I make, from my standpoint, you'll come out good. Maybe President Putin will come out good. But they'll say, Trump was absolutely horrible. It's just that, and I've lived with that for a long time. I've lived with it since just before the first election. I used to get great publicity. Now I get the worst publicity anyone's ever gotten in office, but I won in a landslide, so the people understand. They're the only ones that count, ultimately. But I've also had great reporters. I've had journalists that are very good. But it's very sad when you do the right thing. As an example, they said, because of the fact that Vladimir Putin came to American soil, this was a tremendous defeat for Donald Trump. No, it was really wonderful that he did it. It was a hard thing for him to do, to be honest with you. It was the opposite of what they said, but they said it. Now, if he didn't come, they'd say that was also bad for Trump. There's no way. And there's just a great dishonesty of the press, and I think that's why it's lost its credibility. Its credibility is at an all-time low. We have a thing going on right now in D.C. We went from the most unsafe place anywhere to a place that now friends are calling me up, Democrats are calling me up, and they're saying, sir, I want to thank you. My wife and I went out to dinner last night for the first time in 4 years, and Washington, D.C. is safe, and you did that in 4 days. I'll tell you, it's safe. I had another friend of mine. He has a son who's a great golfer. He's on tour, and he came in fourth yesterday in the big tournament where Scotty Scheffler made the great shot, and He said his son is going to dinner in Washington, D.C. tonight. I said, would you have allowed that to happen a year ago? He said, no way. No way. He said, what you've done is incredible. And I think the people realize it. But the press says, he's a dictator. He's trying to take over. No, all I want is security for our people. But people that haven't gone out to dinner in Washington, D.C. in 2 years are going out to dinner. And the restaurants the last 2 days were busier than they've been in a long time.
Sir, I walked around yesterday with MTG. If you can walk around with D.C. with MTG and not be attacked, the city is safe.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week you warned of what you called severe consequences if a 30-day ceasefire or any type of ceasefire were not agreed to by Russia. Will there be severe consequences? Does that change because of your meeting with the President?
I don't think you need a ceasefire. You know, if you look at the 6 deals that I settled this year, they were all at war. I didn't do any ceasefires. And I know that it might be good to have, but I can also understand strategically why, well, you know, one country or the other wouldn't want it. You have a ceasefire and they rebuild and rebuild and rebuild, and, you know, maybe they don't want that. But if you look at the 6 deals that we made peace, you know, long-term, long-running wars, I didn't do any ceasefires. Would I like the concept. You know, I like the concept of a ceasefire for one reason, because you'd stop killing people immediately, as opposed to in 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever it takes. But we can work a deal where we're working on a peace deal while they're fighting. They have to fight. I wish they could stop. I'd like them to stop. But strategically, that could be a disadvantage for one side or the other. But all of these deals I made without even the mention of the words ceasefire.
President Zelensky, are you disappointed that there's no ceasefire?
The decision to offer Ukraine Article 5-like security guarantees, but stop short of pushing for their full membership.
Yeah, well, we haven't done anything on that yet. If you look back and you go back long before President Putin, it was always a statement that they would never allow Ukraine into NATO. So that was a statement that was made, but we haven't discussed any of that yet. We're going to be discussing it today, but we will give them very good protection, very good security. That's part of it. And the people that are waiting for us, they are, I think they're very like-minded. They want to help out also.
Thank you, President Trump.
Are you disappointed there's no ceasefire, President?
The United States has already given hundreds of billions of dollars to this war effort in Ukraine. At best, it is a stalemate, and the killing continues. So, President Trump, how much more is the United States willing to give Ukraine? And President Zelensky, how much more do you want?
Well, I'll start off just by saying we're not giving anything now. We're selling weapons. This is something before, I guess the number is well over $300 billion. That was under Joe Biden, a corrupt politician, not a smart man, never was. By the way, go back 40 years, he was not a smart man 40 years ago either, but now he's in particular bad. This was done by a corrupt administration that shouldn't have been in, and frankly, if the right results of the election were given, if I were president, this war would have never taken place, and he would have been very happy, because he would have liked to have seen. I mean, they went through hell. He went through hell. This war would have never happened, and the people that were killed, a couple of million people, a lot of people with soldiers and everything else, and the people that have been displaced and forced into other areas and other countries because of what's happened, none of that would have happened. And I'm just saying that he was a horrible president. Whether it was the borders or this, he was just a horrible, corrupt president.
I can't. Thank you so much. So first of all, we have possibility now to buy weapons from the United States. We are thankful for this program and this opportunity. We are thankful for Europe. They pay for this. And through NATO program, for example, Pearl and etc., we have some programs where we can have some money to finance this. And this is a part, I think, it's not a part for the war and to defend us. It also will be a part for security guarantees, to strengthen our army, to rearm Ukrainian army. This is very, very important. And it depends how much money we need to rearm. For example, the question of air defense, we spoke about it with President Trump, and I'm happy that we have now bilateral decisions and we work on it with production, American production. Nobody in Europe has so many air defense like Patriots, for example. We need it very much, and this is also about defending.
And I think the good news, we make the best military equipment in the world by far. You mentioned the Patriots. How good are they?
Systems.
We have systems, they're literally 100% foolproof. And it's really like shooting two bullets, two bullets hitting each other in the air in a space like this. The chance is 100%. It's 99 to 100%. So we sell the equipment to NATO. And NATO does what, I don't know what the arrangement is that you have with, but I know that they want you to have the equipment. And we're getting the best equipment in the world, but they pay us for the equipment. Under Biden, it was just crazy what was going on. I believe the number is over 300. I think it could be $350 billion worth of equipment and money and everything else. And we've made more progress in settling this war in the last 2 months than they made in 4 years. This should have been settled a long time ago, but it should have never happened. Yeah, please.
Real quickly, you pushed out on social media.
Brian, go first.
You pushed out on social media about doing away with mail-in ballots and potentially electronic voting machines. Can you expand on that and how important
Well, that's a very off-topic. Just very quickly. Mail-in ballots are corrupt. Mail-in ballots, you can never have a real democracy with mail-in ballots. And we, as a Republican Party, are going to do everything possible that we get rid of mail-in ballots. We're going to start with an executive order that's being written right now by the best lawyers in the country to end mail-in ballots because they're corrupt. And you know that we're the only country in the world, I believe, I may be wrong, but just about the only country in the world that uses them because of what's happened. Massive fraud all over the place. The other thing we want change are the machines. For all of the money they spend, it's approximately 10 times more expensive than paper ballots. And paper ballots are very sophisticated with the watermark paper and everything else. We would get secure elections. We'd get much faster results. The machines, they say we're going to have the results in 2 weeks. With paper ballots, you have the results that night. Most people, many countries use paper ballots. It's the most secure form. So between paper ballots, very, very important, paper ballots, and I think maybe even more important, the mail-in voting. We're going to end mail-in voting. It's a fraud. If you have mail-in vote, even Jimmy Carter with this commission, they set it up. He said the one thing about mail-in voting, you will never have an honest election if you have mail-in. And it's time that the Republicans get tough and stop it because the Democrats want it. It's the only way they can get elected. Because with men and women's sports and with transgender for everybody and open borders and all of the horrible things, and now the new thing is they love crime. They're fighting me on the fact that I've made Washington, D.C. safe. We're not going to get mugged, beaten up, or killed like all the people you've been watching get so badly hurt. I'm glad, I hate to take your time with this, but I'm glad you asked me that question. We're going to stop mail-in ballots because it's corrupt. When you go to a voting booth and you do it the right way and you go to a state that runs it properly, you go in, they even ask me. They asked me for my license plate, for identity. I said, I don't know if I have it. They said, sir, you have to have it. I was very impressed, actually. But it's very hard to cheat with mail-in voting. As you know what happens in California, it's so corrupt where some people get 5, 6, 7 ballots delivered to them. Now, we got to stop mail-in voting, and the Republicans have to lead the charge. The Democrats want it because they have horrible policy. If you have mail-in voting, you're not going to have many Democrats get elected. That's bigger than anything having to do with redistricting, believe me. And the Republicans have to get smart. We're not going to have a country. I said for a long time at rallies, you need borders and you need free and fair elections. Those two things. Otherwise, you don't have. We have strong borders now. In 90 days, Mr. President, we didn't have 0 in 3 months. Not one person came in illegally into our country. In fact, even I find that hard to believe, but it's run by a little bit of a liberal group that put out the numbers, so I guess it's, but 0, 0, and 0. You go back a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 millions of people poured into our country. It was terrible. Thank you very much.
What security guarantees do you need from President Trump to be able to make a deal? Is it American troops, intelligence, equipment? What is it?
everything. And really, it includes two parts. First, strong Ukrainian army. That's what I began to discuss with your colleagues. And it's a lot about weapon and then people and training missions and intelligence. And second, we will discuss with our partners. It depends on the big countries, on the United States, on a lot of our friends.
Mr. President, are you willing to commit American troops to that NATO-like protection in order to get President Zelensky to a deal today?
Well, I don't know if you define it that way, but NATO-like, I mean, we have people waiting in another room right now. They're all here from Europe, biggest people in Europe, and they want to give protection. They feel very strongly about it, and we'll help them out with that. I think it's very important. I think it's very important to get the deal done.
You've been involved with the peacekeeping in Ukraine since your first day.
They love their country, and we want to get this war ended. That's all I can do. I love the Ukrainian people, but I love all people. I love the Russian people. I love them all. I want to get the war stopped. Very important.
Mr. President, was there any aspect of your discussion with Vladimir Putin that left you disappointed?
Look, I was just telling the President, I just spoke to President Putin indirectly, and we're going to have a phone call right after these meetings today. And we may or may not have a trilat. If we don't have a trilat, then the fighting continues. And if we do, we have a good chance. I think if we have a trilat, there's a good chance of maybe ending it. But he's expecting my call when we're finished with this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
President Trump and Ukrainian President Mr. Zelensky in the Oval Office earlier this afternoon ahead of a multilateral meeting with the two of them and European leaders all gathered at the White House today. Welcome back to C-SPAN's live coverage of this historic meeting at the White House today between President Trump and Ukrainian President Mr. Zelensky. On your screen is a live shot inside the White House at the Cross Hall in the White House. You can see the 7 flags from the European leaders along with the U.S. flag all lined up there. We are expecting any moment the president to come out with those 7 European leaders and line up for a photo. They call it a family photo, and we'll be live with that as well here on C-SPAN. Following the family photo, then, the White House is preparing for a multilateral meeting between the 3 parties. They will meet in the East Room, and the press will get another opportunity to potentially ask questions of all those gathered in the East Room at the White House. That is slated for 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll be live with that as well. Then there will be a closed-door meeting between the President, Mr. Zelensky, and the European leaders, as all of them try to forge a path forward for a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. What is the White House hoping for? They are hoping for, after today, a trilateral meeting between Mr. Putin, Mr. Zelensky, and President Trump. If that happens, according to Politico, it would happen within a week from today. This, of course, follows that summit in Alaska between Mr. Trump, President Trump, and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Let's go back to Friday. Here's a portion of what the Russian president had to say on President Trump's attempts to reach a peace deal on Ukraine.
We see the strive of the administration and President Trump personally to help facilitate the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict, and his strive to get to the crux of the matter, to understand its history, is precious. As I've said, the situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation. However strange it may sound in these conditions, we have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us, a terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced
чтобы украинская урегулированная сила устойчивый и долгосрочный характер, должны быть устранены все первопричины кризиса, которые говорили неоднократно. Обеспечен учет всех законов озабоченности России, восстановлен справедливый баланс в сфере безопасности в Европе и в мире в целом. Я согласен с президентом Трампом, он сегодня говорил об этом, что, безусловно, должна быть обеспечена и безопасность Украины. Конечно, мы готовы над этим работать. Хочется надеяться, что достигнутое нами понимание позволит приблизиться к той цели и откроет дорогу к миру на Украине. Мы рассчитываем, что в Киеве и европейских столицах воспримут все это в конструктивном ключе и не станут чинить никаких препятствий. Не будут предпринимать попыток за счет провокаций или закулисных интриг сорвать намечающийся прогресс.
Russian President Vladimir Putin standing by President Trump in Alaska on Friday. He said there, we need to eliminate the roots of conflict. The agreement we reach will pave path toward peace. The White House is hoping today that the President Trump, can get in a room with Mr. Putin and Mr. Zelensky after today's meetings here at the White House with European leaders and the Ukrainian president. We're involving all of you in the conversation as part of our coverage here today on C-SPAN. Here's how you can join us today, this afternoon. If you're a Republican, dial in at 202-748-8920. Democrats, 202-748-8921. And independents, all others, 202-748-8922. You can also text if you'd like. Join the conversation in a text by including your first name, city, and state to 202-748-8903. Megan is up first in Massachusetts, Democratic caller. Megan, what do you think so far from what you're seeing at the White House today?
Quite frankly, I'm just embarrassed. It doesn't look good. The optics look terrible.
In what way?
Well, the meeting he had with Putin, rolled out the red carpet, had our soldiers on their hands and knees. Putin was smiling ear to ear as they drove off together. And, he had Zelensky next to him and speak. He had his sycophantic journalists asking questions. It just doesn't look good.
Megan's thoughts there in Massachusetts. Paula, an independent in Brooksville, Florida. Paula, go ahead. Share your thoughts with us this afternoon.
Well, I really don't know what to share about. I'm upset about the way President Trump does treat President Zelensky. That's just how I feel. I'm just upset about the whole thing. And I don't think it's going to end.
What about today? How do you think he treated him today?
Well, what I've seen is good, but he always tries to blame Biden for a lot of stuff, and Biden's not the president.
All right. Paula there in Florida, she's an independent. Vincent, also an independent in California. Vincent, let's turn to you.
Yes, thank you. So I kind of agree with the last caller because it seems that President Trump always wants to turn back and look at the past instead of seeing where we are and where we go from here. How do you make plans if you keep looking in the past? And that's kind of it. Thank you.
All right. Nancy in California, Fresno, California, Democratic caller. Nancy, have you been watching this afternoon?
Yes, I've been watching since 10 o'clock. First of all, I want to say thank you to your guest, Mr. Bowman. He was so informative, so helpful at educating us to the backstory of what's been going on here. Secondly, I have a message for President Zelensky. Don't give an inch. The American people are with you. Don't let Trump bully you into giving up any of your country. We would not, the hubris of these callers and these people, we would not let Putin take Alaska from us and just say, please, have Alaska. No, we wouldn't do that. Zelensky, President Zelensky, America is with you. Don't give an inch. Thank you.
Nancy, before you go, what do you make of these European, we lost Nancy, the European leaders that showed up today at this meeting? First, they met, by the way, with Mr. Zelensky at the Ukrainian embassy in the United States here before they headed over to the White House. It includes the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, the Italian Prime Minister, Meloni, the German Chancellor, Merz, is also in attendance, along with the Finnish President, Alexander Stubb. You have Ursula von der Leyen, who is the President of the European Commission, along with NATO Secretary General, all in attendance today. They arriving at the White House after they met with Mr. Zelensky at the Ukrainian embassy here in Washington, D.C. They arrived first at the White House. They went into the White House after arriving at the North Portico entrance, which is traditional for our allies to arrive there and be greeted by the White House. They went inside, and that was around noon Eastern time. Around 1 p.m. Eastern time, Mr. Zelensky arrived at the West Wing entrance of the White House, just steps away from the Oval Office. And then shortly after that, we saw as cameras were allowed into the Oval Office at the top of a meeting, a face-to-face between President Trump and President Zelensky following President Trump's meeting with the Russian president on Friday. On your screen is the 7 flags from those European leaders along with the American flag. We are waiting for them to all come out and pose for a photograph before a multilateral meeting begins around 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Tammy, Beecher, Illinois, Independent. Tammy, you are next. What do you think of this today? Tammy in Beecher, Illinois, Independent. All right, Tammy, I have to move on. Lee in Michigan, Republican caller.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. This is my first time calling. I want to bring up 2 things. One about people learning about what diplomacy really is, and secondly about an off-topic that President Trump was exposed or talked about regarding mail-in ballots. As far as diplomacy is concerned, when you want to get something that you know you're going to have a hard time getting, you have to present niceties. You have to present your strength also at the same time. That is what President Trump did in Alaska. I really wonder about people that talk in a negative way about that particular meeting in Alaska, and the reporters that are trying to bring up negative issues when things are supposed to stay positive until they're done with their meeting. We don't know what's going to happen. And the other thing I wanted to bring up, if that's okay, was about his statement about mail-in ballots. I hope that at some point, if he doesn't clarify anything, people are going to talk with the Baileys and decide to take their advice on whether absentee votes for military and disabled people are going to be included, despite the total mail-in votes.
All right, Lee. We'll go to Leslie next. South Padre Island, Texas. Leslie, have you been watching this afternoon the summit here that's happening at the White House with the Ukrainian president and European leaders?
Yes, and I have to tell you, I'm very impressed that so many of the leaders showed up. You know, you could look at it in 2 ways. You know, it is a very important conversation beyond, you know, it's just simply that the war has gone on for so long, but it also could be a show of force against Trump. Because, you know, I think I used to be a journalist many moons ago, but you can really tell how evident it is in the press conferences that the White House is choosing the reporters. And Peter Doocy from Fox being able to ask 7 questions that all seemed combative. You know, I'm amazed that Trump did select a Ukrainian journalist or 2, but it really is chaotic. It's almost as if he needs someone to direct the press conference, because otherwise, again, everybody knows he goes off in his tangents. It's not a good look for us, but beyond that, I'm glad that at least Zelensky had time to speak a little bit, you know. But I was just discouraged that even questions directed at Zelensky, Trump took over.
Leslie, what did you think of the dynamic today in the Oval Office versus that dynamic in February, the last time the Ukrainian president was sitting right next to President Trump in the Oval Office?
Well, I think it's pretty remarkable, obviously, that it went well. I wouldn't imagine that he would be attacked as if he was the last time, but some of the journalists have been saying, well, Zelensky's behaved himself. Well, he behaved himself in the prior press conference perfectly until Vance came after him in a completely inappropriate way. So I believe Zelensky is much more graceful and cultured, and, even if people do say he, sometimes reacts strongly, I think when you have a world leader, the respect should be there, like another caller said, to go ahead and be graceful with your conversations. But, Trump is another animal entirely, so what can we expect?
Oh, Leslie,
but I'm very encouraged about today.
All right. Well, Leslie, you made comments about the number of questions that were asked by Fox's correspondent there, along with the types of questions that were asked. We also heard the reporter who spoke to here, let's look at what's happening here at the White House now. We've got the president along with Mr. Zelensky. They've left the West Wing. Let's listen in and watch here.
That was not a great day. Is everything okay? You all set? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
President Trump, along with the European leaders and President Zelensky, posing there in front of photographers. You can see before, when we were live with the cross hall at the White House, there were 8 flags, the 7 European leaders and the American flag. A 9th was added, and the Ukrainian flag put right there in the middle. And you can see you saw there that the Ukrainian president joined the European leaders and President Trump for this photo. Family photo is what it was called by the White House. All 8 getting together there and posing before they head, again, led by President Trump and Mr. Zelensky in tow, along with European leaders, led to the East Room of the White House. And that is where this multilateral meeting is going to be taking place. There it is on your screen. You can see the staff preparing for the leadership to come into the room. And you can see that the Vice President, J.D. Vance, is in there as well. They will all sit down at that table. We'll see if they take some questions from reporters. In the meantime, while we wait for the room to get situated, let's hear from Blake in Jacksonville, North Carolina, Democratic caller. Blake, go ahead.
Yes, how you doing?
Blake, what do you make of today at the White House?
It's crazy. It's real crazy. Trump is blaming Zelensky for something that he hadn't done. Yet he rolled out a red carpet for a criminal, and he wound up being a criminal. Why don't he do the right thing and pull the people together as one nation and let us love each other and get the militaries out of our nation? And if you want to have them fight, help Ukraine fight. That's all I got to say about it because it's real wrong, sugar. And God bless everybody in America because we all got to stand as one. We are one nation under God, indivisible.
All right, Blake. Harold in Texas, Republican caller. Harold?
Hello. I have a figure, 19,546. That is the number of children which Russia still holds who belong in Ukrainian homes. These are the forgotten souls. Let us not forget that Jesus said, let the little children come to me. And
all right, Harold, I'm going to jump in. I want to go into the room. President Trump has taken a seat. Let's listen and watch.
Isn't it just such an incredible place? Well, we're building a big right here. It would be right through that. Right through here. Whole world. It's going to be, I'll tell you, it's going to be fantastic, actually. You can let them come in. Successful. Please, come on. You guys want to take some questions? Hi, Mark. One of the wonderful things that took place today, we've had a very successful day thus far. Important discussions as we work to end the killing and stop the war in Ukraine. We're all working for the same goal. It's special no matter where you're from. It represents so much, and it really is beautiful. Thank you for all of the wonderful things that took place today. We've had a very successful day thus far. Important discussions as we work to end the killing and stop the war in Ukraine. We're all working for the same goal. Very simple goal. We want to stop the killing, get this settled. I've just had the honor of being with President Zelensky and all of the discussions that we've had. We've covered a lot of territory. And I spoke indirectly with President Putin today. We're going to call President Putin right after this meeting. I'm sure we're going to have a solid meeting, good meeting, maybe a great meeting. And we're going to try and work out a trilab after that and see if we can get it finished. Put this to sleep, because this is not since the Second World War has there been anything like this. So I'm honored to welcome NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. He's a great gentleman, great political leader in Europe generally, but now he's the NATO Secretary General, and you're doing a fantastic job. Thank you very much, Mark. Prime Minister Starmer of the United Kingdom, our friend and my friend, and doing really well, and people like him a lot. We all like him. Everyone knows President Macron of France, who's been with me from the beginning. One of the first people I met is a foreign dignitary, and I liked him from day one. Usually I like that's a pretty unusual thing. Prime Minister Meloni of Italy, who's a really great leader and an inspiration over there. She's served now, even though she's a very young person, she's served there for a long period of time relative to others. They don't last very long. You've lasted a long time. You're going to be there a long time. Chancellor Merz of Germany, who is a very strong person and a very strong leader and very highly respected in Germany. And he's my friend, and it's an honor to have him as my friend. Thank you very much. Very good. You look great with your tan. Where did you get that tan? I want to get a tan like that. President Stubb of Finland, and he's somebody that, where are we here? Oh, you look better than I've ever seen you look. But you've done a great job, and we wanted to have you here because you're somebody that we all respect. And you've had a lot to do with the success, I think, and the potential success. And thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it. and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who is somebody that we just made a big deal with all of those countries. I don't know. I think you might be more powerful than all these guys at this table. I don't know. But we had a great negotiation, and you're respected all over the world. So I want to thank you very much for being here. It's a great honor to have you. The Alaska Summit reinforced my belief that while difficult, peace is within reach, and I believe that in a very significant step, President Putin agreed that Russia would accept security guarantees for Ukraine, and this is one of the key points that we need to consider, and we're going to be considering that at the table also, like who will do what, essentially. I'm optimistic that collectively we can reach an agreement that would deter any future aggression against Ukraine, and I actually think there won't be. I think that's even overrated, largely overrated, but we're going to find out, and I think that the European nations are going to take a lot of the burden. We're going to help them, and we're going to make it very secure. We also need to discuss the possible exchanges of territory, taking into consideration the current line of contact. That means the war zone, the war lines that are pretty obvious, very sad actually to look at them. And negotiating positions. President Putin, also you have President of Ukraine, who is you just met a little while ago, and we're going to try and get a three-party meeting, maybe as soon as we can. And I have a feeling you and President Putin are going to work something out. Ultimately, this is a decision that can only be made by President Zelensky and by the people of Ukraine working also together in agreement with President Putin. And I just think that's very good things are going to come of it. So I hope we have a good meeting. And if we can have a good meeting, I'll set up a meeting with President Putin. And if you'd like, I'll go to that meeting. And not that I want to do that, but I will do that because we want to save a lot of people from dying. A lot of people are dying, and we got to save them. Got to save it. 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 people sometimes a week. All of us would obviously prefer an immediate ceasefire while we work on a lasting peace, and maybe something like that could happen. As of this moment, it's not happening, but President Zelensky and President Putin can talk a little bit more about that. You know, in the 6 or so wars that we stopped, we haven't had a ceasefire. And so I don't know that it's necessary. You can do it through the war, but it would be, I like the ceasefire from another standpoint. You immediately stop the killing. But I believe a peace agreement at the end of all of this is something that's very attainable, and it can be done in the near future. With all of the wars that I got involved in, we only have this one left. Of course, as I walk out the door, there'll probably be a new one starting, and I'll get that stopped too. But I thought this was going to be one of the easier ones. It's actually one of the most difficult. They're very complex. The next step would be for a trilateral meeting, and that will be worked out. And I just look forward to working and having a great result. We're going to spend a lot of time today talking about, and we're really honored you guys came over. I mean, these are the heads of major countries and respected all over Europe. And they speak for, largely, I think I should say, but pretty much for the other countries of Europe. And we will come to a resolution today, I think, on almost everything, including probably the security. And that's pretty much the story. I'd like to say, Mr. President, would you like to say something? You have the media. If you want, you could come over and you could stand, you could use mine, or you could just turn around, whichever you feel comfortable with.
Thank you so much. I can speak without microphone. Thank you so much. I think that we had very good conversation with President Trump.
Very good.
And it really was the best one. Maybe the best one will be in the future. But it was really good. And we spoke about very sensitive points. The first one is security guarantees. And we are very happy with President that all the leaders are here, and the security in Ukraine depends on the United States and on you and on those leaders who are with us in our hearts. They have been online before yesterday and etc. So a lot of countries on the side of Ukraine, our people and all of us want to finish this war, stop Russia and stop this war. We spoke about it and we will speak more about security guarantees. This is very important that the United States gives such strong signal and is ready for security guarantees. The second point, or maybe the first, the humanitarian direction, very important to exchange all the prisoners, and I think that President will help, and I was very thankful to your wife again, Mr. President, for the letter about our abducted children, and I hope that really it can be a historic role for the people to bring kids back to the families and be happy.
Get the people back, yeah.
Yes, this is so important, and I'm happy that we discussed it, this track with President Trump, and I hope that we will find decisions. And then what is very important, that all the sensitive things, territorial, etc., we will discuss on the level of leaders during trilateral meeting, and President Trump will try to organize such meeting, and he said that he will come or not come. Ukraine will be happy if you will participate.
Want me there, I will be there.
Yeah, thank you. And I think this is very important. Yes, so security guarantees, bringing kids back, and all our people, not only warriors, first of all warriors, and all the civilians, journalists, a lot of people in prison. So we need them back. And guarantees which will work for the years. We spoke about it, and I showed the President a lot of details on the battlefield, on the map. Thank you so much. Thank you for the map, by the way.
Good map.
It was great. Yeah. I'm thinking how to take it back.
We'll get to it.
No. I think that we had constructive, specific meeting, and I'm very thankful to all the leaders who are here, and you help a lot, and so we are happy that we have such big unity today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much,
for hosting us.
Mr. President. I think you'll see that President Putin really would like to do something else. I think when we set that up, when we do, I think it's going to be when, not if. I think you're going to see some really positive moves. I know there's over 1,000 prisoners, and I know they're going to release them. Maybe they're going to release them very soon, like immediately, which I think is great. But we're going to set that up today after this meeting. So very good and great remarks. I appreciate it. Mark, as head of NATO, maybe you could say a few words, please.
Yes, I will be very brief. I really want to thank you, President of the United States, dear Donald, for the fact that you, as I said before, broke the deadlock. Basically with President Putin by starting that dialogue. And I think it was in February that you had the first phone call, and from there we are now where we are today. And that is, I think if we play this well, we could end this. And we have to end this. We have to stop the killing, we have to stop the destruction of Ukraine's infrastructure. It is a terrible war, so I'm really excited. And let's make the best out of today and make sure that from today onwards, we get this thing to an end as soon as possible. I really want to thank you for your leadership, what you are doing for Volodymyr, but of course also all the European colleagues. It is really crucial. And the fact that you have said, I'm willing to participate in the security guarantees is a big step. It's really a breakthrough, and it makes all the difference. So also thank you for that.
Well, NATO also has agreed from 2% to 5%, which is something that is a massive amount of money. And it's 2% that wasn't always paid to 5% that is paid. That's a big difference. And so we appreciate that. That was a great move. Thank you very much. Ursula, maybe on behalf of the Commission, you could say a couple of words.
Yes. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's a very important moment. Indeed, we are here, Europeans, as friends and allies. We had a fantastic NATO summit. Together as the two largest and biggest economies in the world, we had the largest trade deal ever agreed. And now we are here to work together with you on a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. Stop the killing. This is really our common interest, stop the killing. And indeed, it's very good to hear that we're working on the security guarantees, Article 5 lies security guarantees, so important. But I want to thank you also that you mentioned the thousands of Ukrainian children that have been abducted. And as a mother and grandmother, every single child has to go back to its family. This should be one of our main priorities also in these negotiations, to make sure that the children come back to Ukraine, to their families.
Thank you. And we did. I was just thinking we're here for a different reason, but we just a couple of weeks ago made the largest trade deal in history. So that's a big thing, and congratulations. That's great. Thank you very much, Ursula. Mr. Chancellor from Germany, a very great leader.
Mr. President, dear Donald, many thanks for having us today. I think this is extremely helpful that we are meeting and hearing that the two of you are having such a good meeting today here in Washington. The next steps ahead are the more complicated ones now. The path is open. You opened it last Friday. But now the way is open for complicated negotiations. And to be honest, we all would like to see a ceasefire, the latest from the next meeting on. I can't imagine that the next meeting would take place without a ceasefire. So let's work on that, and let's try to put pressure on Russia, because the credibility of these efforts we are undertaking today, are depending on at least a ceasefire from the beginning of the serious negotiations from next step on. So I would like to emphasize this aspect and would like to see a ceasefire from the next meeting, which should be a trilateral meeting wherever it takes place.
Well, we're going to let the president go over and talk to the president, and we'll see how that works out, and if we can do that. I will say, and again I say it, in the 6 wars that I've settled, I haven't had a ceasefire. We just got into negotiations, and one of the wars was, as you know, in the Congo was 31 years long. Another one that we settled last week with 2 great countries was 35 years going on, and we had no ceasefire. So if we can do the ceasefire, great. And if we don't do a ceasefire, because many other points were given to us, many points were given to us, great points. Please, Georgia, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Donald, Mr. President, for hosting us today in this important meeting. And I think it is an important day, a new phase, after 3 years and a half that we didn't see any kind of sign from the Russian side that there was a willing for dialogue. So something is changing, something has changed, thanks to you. Thanks also to the stalling in the battlefield, which was achieved with the bravery of Ukrainians and with the unity that we all provided to Ukraine. And the reason why I mention it is that we also have to remind that if we want to reach peace and if we want to guarantee justice, we have to do it united. So that's why it's a very good day, the one we are in. You can obviously count on Italy as it was from the beginning. We are on the side of Ukraine, and we do absolutely support your efforts towards peace. We will talk about many important topics. The first one is security guarantees, how to be sure that it won't happen again, which is the precondition of every kind of peace. I'm happy that we will discuss about that. I'm happy that we will begin from a proposal, which is the, let's say, Article 5 model, which was Italian at the beginning. So we are always ready to bring our proposals for peace, for dialogue. It's something we have to build together to guarantee peace and to defend the security of our nation. So thank you, Mr. President, for hosting us.
Thank you very much. Emmanuel?
Thank you, Mr. President, for organizing this meeting and for your commitment. And everything was said, but I just have to say here, everybody around this table is in favor of peace. And we work very hard, and we've worked very hard during the past few years to have a peace which is a robust and long-standing peace. This is why the idea of a trilateral meeting is very important, because this is the only way to fix it. And by the way, I think as a follow-up, we would need probably a quadrilateral meeting, because when we speak about security guarantees, we speak about the whole security of the European continent. And this is why we are all united here with Ukraine on this matter. In order to organize such a trilateral meeting, your idea to ask for a truce or a ceasefire, at least to stop the killings, as we discussed, is a necessity. And we all support this idea. And in order to have such a long-standing peace for Ukraine and for the whole continent, we do need the security guarantees. And the first one is clearly a credible Ukrainian army for the years and decades to come. And the second one is our own commitment, all of us. And we worked very hard during the past few months among the coalition of the willings, with the support of NATO, to build the different pillars of security guarantees and our commitments. And you can be sure that the Europeans are very lucid about the fact that they have their fair share in these security guarantees for Ukraine, but their own security is clearly at stake in this situation. So you can count on us, as we can count on you, in order to deliver this robust peace for both Ukraine and Europe.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you for hosting us here. Can I start where Emmanuel started, which is we all want peace. The war in Ukraine has had a huge impact, particularly on the Ukrainians who've borne the brunt of it, but it's also had an impact on Europe and on the United Kingdom. There's not a family or community that hasn't been affected. And when we talk about security, we're talking about the security not just of Ukraine, we're talking about the security of Europe and the United Kingdom as well, which is why this is such an important issue. I think this is such an important meeting. As a group, I think we've had a discussion on the phone a number of times, Mr. President, but be able now to be around the table to take it forward. And I really feel that we can, I think, with the right approach this afternoon, make real progress, particularly on the security guarantees, and your indication of security guarantees, of some sort of Article 5 style guarantees, fits with what we've been doing with the Coalition of the Willing, which we started some months ago, bringing countries together and showing that we were prepared to step up to the plate when it came to security. With you coming alongside, the US alongside what we've already developed, I think we could take a really important step forward today. A historic step, actually, could come out of this meeting in terms of security for Ukraine and security in Europe. I also feel that we can make real progress towards a just and lasting outcome. Obviously, that has to involve Ukraine, and a trilateral meeting seems the sensible next step. So thank you for being prepared to take that forward, because I think if we can ensure that that is the progress out of this meeting, both security guarantees and some sort of progress on trilateral meeting of some sort to bring some of the difficult issues to a head, then I think today will be seen as a very important day in recent years in relation to a conflict which has gone on for 3 and a bit years, and so far nobody's been able to bring it to this point. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much. And, it's very interesting because this is the first for the White House. You can't say that very often. It's seen a lot over the years, since 1800, 1799, to be almost exact. But this is the first where we've had so many prime ministers, presidents, the heads of European nations. And by the way, Alex, I'd like you to say a couple of words, too. You're a young, powerful man. Before I finish up, I want you to say a couple of words. Go ahead.
I'll take the notion of youth back to my wife and try to convince her. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think in the past 2 weeks we've probably had more progress in ending this war than we have in the past 3.5 years. And I think the fact that we're around this table today is very much symbolic in the sense that it's Team Europe and Team United States helping Ukraine. And the progress that we're looking out of this meeting is about the security guarantees, which are a big part of this. And then, of course, moving towards a process with a trilateral meeting with you and President Putin and President Zelensky. Some of the international media might wonder, why is the President of Finland here? I think the reason is probably that we might come from a small country, but we have a long border with Russia. over 800 miles. And we, of course, have our own historical experience with Russia from World War II, the Winter War and the War of Continuation. And if I look at the silver lining of where we stand right now, we found a solution in 1944, and I'm sure that we'll be able to find a solution in 2025 to end Russia's war of aggression and find and get a lasting and just peace. The situation is very difficult, but that's why we're here.
Thank you, Alex, very much. Good job. So we're going to be meeting for a while, and we're going to discuss some of the issues. And I don't think there's any issue that's overly complex. It's at a point now where people want to do things. I really do believe, I've known him for a long time. I've always had a great relationship with him. I think that President Putin wants to find an answer too. And we'll see. And in a certain period of time, not very far from now, a week or 2 weeks, we're going to know whether or not we're going to solve this, or is this horrible fighting going to continue. We'll do our best to get it ended. And I believe you have two willing parties, and usually that's good news, but two willing parties that want to make a deal. And we'll journey together, and we'll go over, and we'll see if it can be done. And it's possible it might not be able to be done. On the other hand, it's possible it will, and we're going to save thousands and thousands of lives a week. And so it's something we really have to do. And or at least we have to give it our best. It's all you can do. You can give it your best. But I think we may have a very good outcome. So I want to thank you all, and the media, I want to thank you. We're going to be staying here for a little while. Then we're going to walk over to the Oval Office, and we're going to have another little discussion about similar matters. And then they're going to go home to their great countries and report. And I'm going to remain here and work, and you're going to go and work. We're all going to be working. We may be in a different location, but that's what we know how to do is work. But I want to thank the media. Has been actually very fair, generally speaking, very fair. I think it's important that they're fair because this is a very important subject. We have to get it ended. And so that's all we ask for is fairness with the media. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
President Trump convening today with European leaders, and this time including Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, all at the White House to discuss a possible pathway to peace in the Russia-Ukraine war. Just last week, President Trump sat down with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska with the same goal. Earlier today, in the Oval Office, President Trump and President Zelensky met and exchanged words. They answered questions from reporters. We'll show that to you in just a moment after a quick reminder that you can hear more about today's summit and offer your thoughts, your reaction during our Washington Journal program that gets underway live at 7 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning on C-SPAN. I'll look now at that Oval Office meeting with President Trump and President Zelensky earlier today. It's about 25 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to have the President of Ukraine with us. We've had a lot of good discussions, a lot of good talks, and I think progress is being made, very, very substantial progress in many ways. We had a good meeting, as you know, just a short while ago with the President of Russia, and I think there's a possibility that something could come out of it, and today's meeting is very important. We have, I guess, the seven very powerful leaders from Europe, and we're going to be meeting with them right after this meeting, and thank you very much for being here.
Thanks so much, Mr. President. If I can, first of all, thank you for invitation and thank you very much for your efforts, personal efforts to stop killings and stop this war. Thank you. And using this opportunity, many thanks to your wife, First Lady of the United States. She sent a letter to Putin about our children, adopted children, and my wife, First Lady of Ukraine. She gave the letter. It's not to you, to your wife.
Oh, I want
it. Yeah. So we're saying this sensitive topic. Yeah, please. And thanks to our partners and that you supported this format. That after our meeting we can have leaders who are around us, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Finland, EU, NATO. I mean, all partners around Ukraine supporting us. Thanks them. Thank you very much for invitation.
Thank you very much for being here.
President Trump.
Do you think
Yes, Peter, go ahead.
Thank you, President Trump. So, President Zelensky, you say in a post on X today, Russia must end this war, which it itself started. President Trump, you say President Zelensky of Ukraine can end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to. Which is it?
No, I think that's true. I think we're going to have a meeting. I think if everything works out well today, we'll have a trilateral of ending the war when we do that.
And is this the end of the road for American support for Ukraine? Is today's meeting deal or no deal?
I can never say that. It's never the end of the road. People are being killed, and we want to stop that. So I would not say it's the end of the road. No, I think we have a good chance of doing it. It's been almost 4 years now that a lot of people were killed last week. A lot of people last week. I mean, millions of people killed, but a lot of people last week for whatever reason. A big number, a lot of soldiers, on both sides. And I know the president, I know myself, and I believe Vladimir Putin wants to see it ended.
And as you met with Putin on Friday, today you've got President Zelensky here. As you listen to Russia and Ukraine, which side has the better cards?
Well, I don't want to say that. I'm just here to be. Look, this isn't my war. This is Joe Biden's war. He's the one that had a lot to do with this happening, and we want to get it ended. And we want it to end good for everybody. We want it to end good. The people of Ukraine have suffered incredibly.
And to that point, President Zelensky, are you prepared to keep sending Ukrainian troops to their deaths for another couple years, or are you going to agree to redraw the maps?
Thank you for your question. So, first of all, we live under each day attacks. That today have been a lot of attacks and a lot of wounded people, and the child was dead, small one year and a half. So we need to stop this war, to stop Russia, and we need support American and European partners. And we will do our best for this. So, and I think we show that we are strong people, and we supported the idea of the United States, personally of President Trump, to stop this war, to make a diplomatic way of finishing this war. And we are ready for trilateral, as President said. This is a good signal about trilateral. I think this is very good. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Yes, if the peace deal will be achieved, are you going to be willing to send American peacekeepers to Ukraine?
We're going to work with Ukraine. We're going to work with everybody, and we're going to make sure that if there's peace, the peace is going to stay long term. This is very long term. We're not talking about a 2-year peace and then we end up in this mess again. We're going to make sure that everything's good. We'll work with Russia. We're going to work with Ukraine. And we're going to make sure it works. And I think if we can get to peace, it's going to work. I have no doubt about it.
Your team has talked about security guarantees. Could that involve U.S. troops? Would you roll that out in the future?
We'll let you know that maybe later today. We're meeting with 7 great leaders of great countries also, and we'll be talking about that. They'll all be involved, but there'll be a lot of help when it comes to security. There's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe, but we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved.
Vladimir Putin mentioned that the war will not end without addressing the root causes of this war. Have you had an understanding what are the root causes of this war?
Well, look, the war is going to end. When it ends, I can't tell you, but the war is going to end, and this gentleman wants it to end, and Vladimir Putin wants it to end. I think the whole world is tired of it, and we're going to get it ended. It was... I've done 6 wars. I've ended 6 wars, and I thought this maybe would be the easiest one, and it's not the easiest one. It's a tough one. A lot of reasons for it, and they'll be talking about it for a long time. But they'll be talking about the others. Look, India, Pakistan. We're talking about the big places. When you look at, you just take a look at some of these wars. You go to Africa and take a look at that. Rwanda and the Congo. Republic of the Congo. That's been going on for 31 years. And so we've done a total of 6, and we really have 6, not including the fact that we obliterated, and it turned out to be a total obliteration, the nuclear as you said, the future nuclear capability of Iran. And this one, I think we're going to get solved also. I feel confident we're going to get it solved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can you tell us about your conversations with European leaders and what they need to see to support an end to the war?
Yeah, well, we're going to be